Now it's time for us to survive." "What if it's not over? Are you willing to lose everything you worked for?" "In that case, I'll face the consequences of my actions. I've given the last 18 years of my life to the Marines. I truly believe that part of my life is over. Now, my responsibilities lie with my family. I'll be damned if I'm going to spend what little life we may have left on this earth away from them. I'd suggest you think about that, too." "Aye, Gunny," Dunford replied half-heartedly as he leaned back into the sofa. His young face drew down, burdened with heavy thought. He pursed his lips as he exhaled through his nostrils. "Gunny?" "Call me Jason. What's on your mind?" "Gunny, I'm sorry. I can't do that." "Understood, Corporal," Jason said, finishing the last of his Coke. "What's on your mind?" "Well, do you think Washington's really gone? I mean, do you think it might have been, propaganda or something?" "No, Corporal." Jason's eyes turned to the floor as memories of old friends flashed through his mind. "It's gone. There's nothing left." "Well, how are we going to come back from this?" Nick asked under his breath. "No one says we will," Jason replied. "And that is why I'm leaving." His words hung heavy in the air as the room grew uncomfortably quiet. Without another word, Corporal Dunford pulled his boonie cover over his eyes and nodded off, his rhythmic breathing only disturbed when his body jolted as if struck by an electrical charge, victim of his own unconscious nightmares. Satisfied that he was alone for the time being, Jason fished his smartphone from the chest pocket of his Marine Corps combat utility uniform blouse. He'd read the last message he had received from Dan so many times he could recite every part of it from memory. That message told him his brother was still alive, or at least it meant that Dan had survived the initial outbreak and had gone into survival mode. It also meant that if he and Abby were heading to Chris's farm, it must mean that Chris was alive too. One way or another, he would find his family, no matter where they were. He held the power button down until the phone carrier's logo splashed across the screen. He waited until the phone had fully booted up before starting to tap out yet another reply, one of many that he knew would not be sent. He had tried several times since he and his men had taken refuge in the house, but every attempt to send a message had failed. He wasn't sure if it was because the network towers were down, commandeered, or if the nuclear blast from D.C. had fried the network. Despite the setbacks, he refused to give up until either someone replied or his phone went completely dead. "Leaving soon. If we get out alive, I will come to the farm. I'll try to message again once we're clear of the base. Have you heard from anyone else? Mom? Ryan? Grandma? Anyone?" He hit send and waited until he saw the alert that his message had failed to send. Although he was not in the least bit surprised, the twinge of disappointment every time he failed to make contact was still there, and still very raw. He shook his head, powering down the phone and slipping it back into his MCCUU blouse pocket. He leaned back, gently rocking himself in the overstuffed soft leather recliner. He'd moved it to the center of the room so he could sit and face the living room windows. The garage sat in the rear of the house and was locked down, and all of the windows on the first floor were boarded up. But, for whatever reason, the previous owner never fortified the front windows before he had vanished. Jason rarely moved far from the recliner. Only on the few occasions that he allowed himself sleep would he give up the chair. If the window were to give way, he wanted himself between the Z's and his men, and would do everything in his power to give them as much time as they needed to escape. He'd already lost too many. Jason flipped on a battery-powered lantern he'd found in the garage amongst a disheveled collection of camping gear. Picking up his copy of Robinson Crusoe from the floor, he thumbed through the pages before finding the dog-eared page he'd left off on. He'd chosen the large novel from the house's impressive bookshelf for no other reason than the oversized tome would last long enough to occupy the mountains of his newfound downtime. He was halfway through a mental debate over whether or not he would continue reading after cannibals were introduced when the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He lifted his eyes from his book, his hand creeping toward his rifle. The cold air was suddenly unnervingly still. A tingling fear crept up his legs like an electric current until it came to rest in his rapidly beating heart. The base was dead silent. "Corporal!" Jason snapped in a restrained whisper. He picked up his M4 and flipped the safety to semi-fire. Nick's eyes popped open and darted around the room for a split second before his hand shot to his own rifle. Jason lifted his fingers to his lips, motioning for silence. Jason pointed to his ears, then out the window. The young corporal nodded and brought his rifle to alert, the weapon tucked to his shoulder with his barrel angled down. Jason cocked his ear toward the window and listened. A wet thud like a hammer hitting a side of beef reverberated through the mostly empty street. He turned to give Dunford an order when suddenly his body erupted in goosebumps. The loud bark rattled his chest, the sharp sound bouncing off buildings up and down the street. The creatures responded, frenzied growls erupting in the stillness as dozens of feet shuffled away from the window. Jason looked over at the young wide-eyed corporal, finding the same confusion he felt mirrored in the young man's face. He moved to open the blinds to get an idea of what was happening outside when a series of taps on the door froze him in his tracks. "SOS?" Nick questioned. "Morse code?" "Open the door!" Jason snapped, raising his rifle to the ready. Jeffries suddenly appeared at the top of the steps, rifle tucked and pointed at the white door. Divots pockmarked his reddened cheek from his chin to his black stubbed hair, the result of sleeping with his face on the carpeted floor upstairs. He sidestepped downward, his short, stocky frame gliding down the stairs as he kept his rifle sights trained on his target. "We fucked, Gunny?" he asked, his breaths rapid and hands trembling. "We'll see. Watch that door," Jason snapped. The dead outside built into a fury, the crescendo of animalistic growls intensifying with every passing second. "The natives are getting a little restless out here," came a man's hushed and raspy voice, with a hint of a southern drawl. "Mind letting me in?" Nick carefully unlatched the locks, looked over at Jason, and swung the door open. A large, round-faced man stood at the entryway, his MCC UUs drenched in putrid black fluids. His M4 dangled from a single-point harness across his chest, an M1911 resting in a drop holster on his leg. A small shovel sat firmly in his right hand, dripping with thick, syrupy gore. Next to him stood the largest golden retriever Jason had ever laid eyes on. The canine's blood-caked golden fur rippled along its back as it bristled in anger. His lips pulled back, long and very dangerous-looking teeth bared in their direction. "Titan, friends," the man commanded. Instantly, the animal calmed, teeth vanishing behind black lips and replaced with a long, drooling tongue. With a wagging tail, he looked up to his master and waited for his next command. "Get inside," Jason ordered. "My thoughts exactly," he said. "Titan, come." "Holy shit, what is that?" Jeffries gasped as the huge dog sauntered in, nails clacking heavily on the white-tiled entryway. "He's a retriever mix," the stranger said as he stepped over the threshold. Nick stole a glance and sprinted down the hall. He skidded to a stop a few feet from the attached garage door. Outside, the diesel engine grumbled as it revved. Exhaust wafted into the air as Jason stooped over to stretch a small steel wire from one baseboard to another. "Surprise," he said to the mass of walking dead as he stood and ran into the garage. The large overhead door was up, the desert tan Humvee sitting outside with its rear door hanging open. Two bodies lay on the clean concrete floor between him and his men. Jason ran for all he was worth, leaping over the corpses with newly perforated heads, his eyes stinging as his senses were suddenly assaulted by the dissolving brains. The thick ammonia smell filled him with the sudden desire to purge himself of his sardine meal. "Go!" he screamed as he dove into the waiting vehicle. He rolled in his seat as Corporal Dunford fed the engine, the momentum slamming the door shut, barely missing Jason's legs in the process. The engine roared as they shot out into the fog, racing away from the zombie-filled house. "What the hell is a surprise party?" Murphy asked as he comforted his dog, stroking Titan's large head as he lay propped on Murphy's lap. "Did you look along the ceiling when you came in?" Jason smiled as he fought to catch his breath. "No. Neither did the mindless corpses. They can't read either." "Okay, I'll buy it. What would they read?" Murphy raised an eyebrow at Jason. "Front toward enemy," Jason answered with a smile. A sudden shockwave rocked the moving vehicle as a series of explosions ripped through the early morning. "Surprise!" Corporal Dunford chuckled. Chapter 2. Adam's eyes never changed. Not like Katie's eyes had when I was forced to tell her that her mother had gone to heaven. The moment when I saw the innocent soul inside her get stomped out of existence and replaced with I don't know what. Not like the fear I see in Rosa and Anna's eyes when they look at me from across the house, or the sorrow I see in Matt, Joe, and Lexi's eyes. Not even like the cautious and questioning looks in Chris's eyes when we run into each other. No, that thing I sat in front of almost every hour of every day since Abby died never changed. It stayed every bit the white-eyed monster that I dragged into the slaughter room after Katie had cried herself to sleep. I spent most of my time with it when I wasn't wiring something together in the bus, eating, or those few moments that sleep took me away from the nightmare of living and into the horrors of my unconscious mind. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the moment those eyes turned black. I needed to be the first one to see when Adam would finally look like the monster he was when he was alive. But it didn't happen. Its eyes never changed. I don't know if it was a matter of time before it happened or if there was something different about the zombies that suddenly could see in the dark. The Adam thing was dead much longer than it had taken for Dale the biker's eyes to turn. I was losing hope that his eyes would ever take on that marble black sheen. My time was growing short. Not that leaving had been openly discussed with me, but too many of those things trickled out of the woods every day. It was inevitable, but I wanted to hold on to the farm as long as I could. When we left, I knew deep in my heart that we would never come back. I would be leaving Abby behind forever. I didn't want to leave before I made sure that everyone who stepped foot on that farm would know exactly what happened there. I went to the far end of the room and kicked on the Briggs & Stratton portable gas generator Chris had procured on one of his scavenging trips. Those trips had all but ended after Adam had marched his horde right to our front door. Since that day, Chris had only gone out once, with Mark and Matt heading out 2 more times. No one else left the farm once they found what they were looking for. I plugged in a shake of his head. Matt let out an audible sigh before returning to his window. Dan was on everyone's mind. He crept toward his room, carefully avoiding the loose board on the floor. As usual, he failed. He cringed at the loud pop of the wooden plank, waiting for the litany of complaints to hit him from the floor below. But no one stirred from their slumber. Everyone, including the kids, were at the limits of their exhaustion. He slipped into his room, seeing his wife sitting in front of their bedroom window. Her blonde hair sat neatly tucked under her white knit cap. Her white coat zipped so far up that it almost covered the black scarf she had wrapped around her neck. Her hands were bare, refusing to wear her gloves, complaining that they impeded her ability to fire the Mosin-Nagant rifle effectively. Anna jumped as the door clicked shut behind her. She spun in her chair, clasping at her chest when she suddenly realized who it was standing in the room with her. If I was a Zed, I'd already... That thing actually tried to use the door. And I'll be damned if it didn't look pissed when it fell down, Murphy exclaimed. It actually looked like it wanted to knock my head off. A goddamn smart zombie, Dunford exhaled. I don't know about smart, Jason said. Smarter than the rest, maybe. Or maybe its brain wasn't as damaged as the others. Hell, it could even be some form of muscle memory. We just don't know enough about these things yet. He looked over at the panting mass of golden fur that had returned its head to Murphy's lap. Bright red blood continued to ooze from the animal's hindquarter, trickling across the oval bite mark and down his golden fur. I hate to bring this up, Jason said, low enough for only Murphy to hear. Especially with what he did to help Jeffries. But what are we going to do about Titan? Not a damn thing, Murphy replied, scratching his companion's belly. He's tough. He'll be fine. He was bit, Jason said simply. Yes, he was, Murphy responded. Wasn't the first time, probably won't be the last. It's never affected him? Whatever poison is in those monsters' saliva makes him sick, but he's always recovered. Murphy smiled. Isn't that right, you big turd? Murphy patted Titan's side. The animal lifted up, covering Murphy's face with slobbery, wet kisses. You mean whatever this is doesn't affect animals? Jason asked. Ever seen a zombie dog? Murphy asked. He's gotten pretty close and personal with those things a few times. You want to come? This time she looked at me, her tiny brown eyes misting over. She opened her mouth but closed it again before shaking her head no. Okay, you don't have to go if you don't want to, I said. Without a word, she got to her feet, walking past me with her head hanging low. With heavy clomps, she made her way up the stairs. The next thing I heard was the door of our room closing and the telltale sound of the door lock clicking. Is Katie mad? Jane asked, looking up from her own Lego creation. No, I replied. She's not mad at you. She's just very sad right now. Katie should be happy, Jane smiled. Oh, why's that? Because Miss Abby gets to meet my mommy and daddy in heaven. She smiled brightly and went back to her colorful blocks. They'll all be waiting for us when we get there. Jane's words punched me square in the gut. I couldn't get away fast enough. I bolted away from the kids and out the door into the bright, sunny morning. As soon as I hit the porch, I doubled over and fought back the rising bile. I put my hands on the railings and leaned in to steady myself while I gulped the frigid air. Dan? Joe called out. Buddy, you okay? Through a haze of tears I tried desperately to hold back. I looked up to see Joe stepping out of the bus. He kept his arm pressed against his body, wincing as his feet hit the gravel driveway. Define okay, I answered, hoping he assumed my trembling was due to the bitterly cold air. You need some help? Should I get Rosa? Nah, I just need some air. I'm going to the willow tree. All right, you need anything, you just holler. I nodded and started toward Abby's grave, looking over the bus as I walked by. I passed by the carport, trying in vain to avoid looking at the vehicles. The gleaming red and white ambulance and Abby's Honda sat next to each other, stripped of anything Joe thought would be useful. I wanted to burn the damn things to reduce them and the memories they held to ash. But the others wouldn't allow it, at least until everything useful had been salvaged. I suddenly noticed a small trailer sitting off to the side of the barn. The 2 bikes that had chased us onto the farm were secured to it with heavy chains. Chris never mentioned a desire to bring the bikes with us, but it didn't surprise me. Honestly, I would have burned them too if given half a chance. I shook my head, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest as grief welled up in me yet again. No matter how many times I walked across the drive, I couldn't stop replaying that day in my head, looking for something I could have done differently. But with every scenario I came up with, the result was always the same. In the end, Abby died. Never again, I thought, running my fingers along the grip of my pistol. I trudged through the deepening snow, plodding along until I could feel the ground start to rise. I continued on until I stood beside the giant weeping willow atop the hill. Snow clung to the tree, its long barren branches coated in white ice that stretched down until their tips raked against the pristine powder on the ground. Sunlight danced through the icy crystals, glittering like rows of gems as a light breeze swirled along the long, thin branches. A small mound sat at the base of the old tree, a handmade cross protruding from the cold snow where my wife was buried. I ran my fingers across the message I had carved into the tree, whispering to myself as memories of her flooded my mind. I turned away from the tree and faced the grave, leaning against the trunk and allowing myself to slide down until I sat on the ground. The cold bit at my face and my uncovered hands. The weight on my chest had grown until it started to crush the air from my lungs. I closed my eyes, doing what little I could to calm myself, and not give in to my immense desire to flee from what I still could not bring myself to accept. But I needed to be there. I needed to say the words that I should have said in the last moments before she died. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly through the pain and guilt that was slowly strangling what was left of my soul. Hey, Abby. Chapter 6. Chris was worried. He walked the tree line by the road, finding another section of his razor wire traps snapped under the press of the growing number of Zeds. Every night there were more, and every day more sections of wire were breached, and soon they would all fail completely. With the constant stream of dead invading his farm, he couldn't afford the time or the manpower to go on a scavenging trip for material to mend the damaged sections. Fortunately, the tiger traps were still effective for the time being. The dead that had gotten through the wire found themselves impaled in deep pits of sharpened rebar spikes. Most of those creatures were dead. The rest Chris killed using Dan's hammer. But even those traps wouldn't last forever. Eventually they would fill to capacity, leaving very little between the Zeds and his home. It had become a daily ritual to gather the bodies into a pile away from the house and burn them. But it had been days since their last pyre. Even that chore had become too dangerous to continue, forcing them to leave the bodies where they fell. The stench of dissolving brain matter hung like a blanket of heavy humidity in the air. Chris looked to the house when he heard the front door slam shut. Dan stood on the porch, looking as if he was trying to catch his breath. He was about to walk over to check on him when he heard Joe's voice. He saw the large man step out of the bus, his face twisting in pain from his still healing gunshot wounds. Dan said a few words Chris couldn't make out before he walked away. Joe stood still, watching Dan go before he shrugged and climbed back into the bus. Chris shook his head and went back to the task at hand. A teen girl ensnared in one of the remaining sections of razor wire glared at him through a single milky eye. The socket of her left eye had been scooped clean, tracks of teeth marks dug deep into the flesh above and below were ordered. "The keys are in it. Just pull it up to the bus and be ready to fly out of here." "You're the boss," Mark said. He turned and bolted to the back of the house where the truck sat waiting. "Mind if I borrow that?" I asked Lexi, pointing to the M&P. "You can keep it," she answered, handing the rifle to me. "It's too bulky. Besides, with the scope you might actually hit something for a change." "Shut up," I said, taking the weapon from her. "So we have the zombie equivalent of a small city bearing down on us. Chris blows up half the damn cornfield, and you still find time to tall flannel shirt. Jesus, Lexi, didn't you ever?" And random pile-ups along the winding road. As they reached the outskirts of Paula, the bright blue sky darkened as gray clouds slowly rolled in. The dying sunlight eventually was overtaken by a gray bleakness, bathing the landscape in dreary colors that better suited a world that was dying around them. The numbers of dead steadily increased as the miles ticked by. Tensions rose as larger gatherings of walking corpses started to appear, mobbed together in tightly packed groups along the road. The Paula Mini-Mart came up on their right as the road opened into a 4-lane highway. A mass of zombies aimlessly milled about the parking lot until the Hummer rolled into view. Terrible hunger drove groups of undead to move into the road ahead of the Hummer, brittle bones shattering with the sudden impact of steel on decaying flesh. "Shit!" Jason spat. "I forgot about the damn casino. That place would have been packed when everyone turned. Get this piece of shit moving." "She's beat up pretty bad from that off-roading trip, Gunny," Dunford shouted as he mashed the accelerator to the floor. The engine growled in protest as their speed only marginally increased. "We're only going to get so much." The vehicle slowly picked up speed as they passed the casino's 4-story parking garage. One by one, a cascade of corpses tumbled over the rooftop, oblivious to the final death that awaited them as they cartwheeled down to the concrete below. Idle corpses had gathered outside the imposing Desert Tan casino, stumbling around as they shambled lazily, and monsters were tearing the building apart from the foundation up. Sporadic gunfire erupted down on the first floor, followed by the dull thuds of bodies crumpling to the floor. Heavy boots clumped up the steps as a cacophony of shouting voices filled the house. "Dan, get ready to move!" Chris shouted. His rifle barked again as 4 deafening shots roared through the hallway, followed by more dull thuds. I jumped to my feet, hefting Katie into my arms. "Now!" Chris screamed. "Close your eyes," I whispered, as I pulled as he strode over to where we sat. "How's he looking, dear?" "He'll be okay," she smiled. "I would like to get him some antibiotics if we can." "I'll see what we can do about that," Joe replied. "You think he'll be able to use this again?" Joe looked over at me as he drew my Glock from his coat pocket. "Not too much, but he still should have it, just in case." She suddenly looked over at Joe with a confused stare. "Why do you have Dan's gun?" "Rosa, Joe took it because—" I started. "I took it because his hands were bleeding and I didn't think he'd be able to shoot," Joe interrupted. "Besides, I ain't never shot a Glock before. Decided I'd give it a whirl. Ain't that right, Dan?" "Yeah," I exhaled. "That's right." Joe smiled, but there was something different in his expression. Trepidation, maybe? Distrust? Constipation? Whatever it was. I took it as the warning I knew it to be. Hurt her, and the undead would be the least of my worries. A point he made clear when I tried to take my gun from him, and he held on to it a second longer than he needed to before letting it go. He nodded at me and returned to the front of the bus. "I'm sorry," Rosa whispered once we were alone again. She reached over and stroked Katie's hair, her eyes glistening in the scant light. Katie groaned a bit before settling back down, letting out a tiny snore just loud enough to be heard over the groaning engine. "I don't know how Katie got away from me," she continued. "I tried to keep them together, but there was so much happening. It's no excuse, and I don't blame you if you hate me for it. I'm really—" "Rosa," I interrupted. "Stop. I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't pissed. But Katie is a handful, and when she sets her mind to something, you'd have to chain her down to stop her. Abby and I could never find a crib that could hold her back when she was barely crawling. You have been nothing but loving toward us, and I know you wouldn't intentionally put Katie in harm's way." "Thank you," she whispered, her lip quivering. "She reminds me a lot of my cousin." "Oh? Have you heard from her since—" "She died when I was young," she interrupted. "I'm sorry, Rosa." "Don't be. It was a long time ago. She was diagnosed with leukemia when she was very young. But she never let it beat her. She stayed stronger than anyone else in my family. She was actually comforting the rest of us when it was her time. That little girl was the oldest 9-year-old I have ever met. Katie has a lot of that same fire in her." "Is she why you became a nurse?" I asked. "It's part of it," she answered. "A few months after she passed away, my parents were killed by a drunk driver. They were on their way home from their anniversary dinner when they were hit." Rosa turned her head from me before the moisture building up in her eyes could escape. She took a deep breath, her shoulders shuddering slightly. I took her hand in mine, pain zinging through my palms as I did. "I moved to Chicago to live with my aunt," she said over her shoulder. "I became a nurse so I wouldn't feel so helpless anymore. But then my aunt died from—" "Maybe," Matt answered. "Did its jewel look different to anyone else?" "Now that you mention it," Lexi said, "it looked a lot darker." "Yeah, I saw that too," I said. "I heard on the radio that a zombie saliva is like a toxin." "Yeah, Anna and I heard that too," Chris said. "It was talked about a couple of days before the broadcast stopped. You were still unconscious then." "I saw them drool like that when I was trapped in the hospital," Rosa added, "especially when they were ready to attack someone. Then there's streaks of greasy fluids from their decomposing flesh. The doors rattled as the things tried to beat their way through them. "It's not going to hold them long," Jason said. "Let's get our shit together, people." "We should check the van first," Murphy said. "See if the battery still has power." "Yeah, good idea," Jason said, eyes scanning the field in front of him. "Murphy, with me. Dunford, Jeffries, sweep the yard. Look for anything useful. Priorities are fuel and water. Meet anything dead and hungry. Keep it quiet. Rifles only if there's no other choice. 5 mics and we're out, van or not." "Aye, Gunny," they snapped in unison before heading off, weapons raised. Jason was immediately on the move, Murphy and Titan taking up position beside him as they made their way to the van. Titan stuck close to Murphy's side, his nose up as he sampled the air. Every few seconds he would lower his head, emitting a low, deep growl before raising up to sniff again. "He knows they're around," Murphy whispered. "Can't tell if he's picking up the ones inside or if there's more." Jason stopped, straining his ears for sounds out of the ordinary. Not picking up any sounds that aroused concern, he nodded at Murphy, and the two continued on. Jason reached the minivan, moving along the driver's side and peering inside the shaded windows for anything living or dead. Murphy did the same thing on the other side, creeping along the vehicle and scanning the inside for hidden dangers. The two met up in front of the van, performing one last check of the area before relaxing their weapons. Jason walked back to the driver's door and found the door unlocked. He lifted the handle, opening the door a crack to sniff the air. Though it was tainted with the heavy aroma of cheap cigars, it was free of the pungent stench of rotting meat. Jason took one last look around and slipped inside the vehicle. Relief washed over him when he hit the door lock button and all the locks opened. A quick check of the lights, and Jason was assured the bat out and scratching Titan's head. "Nothing's ever easy, is it?" Jason sighed again, dropping his head back onto the headrest. "How many did you see?" "Yeah, 6 at least, maybe more." "And I bet there's not a window open in that place either." "Probably not. I guess it smells like an overripe shithouse in there." "No doubt," Jason said. "Shall we deliver the bad news?" "I'll let you handle that," Murph replied as he hopped out of the van. He turned in time to see the two men round the corner of the building. "Think it's your turn for bad news delivery." "Thanks." Jason rolled his eyes. "What's the word, Gunny?" Dunford asked, his speech altered slightly from a swollen red lip. "Not good," Jason replied. "No keys. You turn up anything?" "Yeah, one rotter," Jeffries answered. "Nothing a butt stroke to the skull couldn't cure. Other than that, just more useless junk." "So what's the plan, Gunny?" Dunford asked. "Well," Jason shrugged, "I was thinking we shoot those things through the glass and check their pockets for keys." "What about the noise?" Jeffries asked. "There's too many of them inside to risk hand-to-hand," Jason said. "I don't like it, but it is what it is." "Well, if we're going to do it, let's not half-ass it," Murphy said. "I say we pound on the door and wait to see if any more of them are in the shop. Give it a few seconds and then take them all down at once." "Sounds good to me," Jason said. The double doors creaked under the pressure of so many bodies. Teeth pressed against the small glass panels, torn and bloodied hands scratching at the wood. A dead woman with half her face torn away slammed her forehead against the door until her eye popped free of the socket and dangled on her cheekbone. She slammed against the door again, catching the eye between her bony face and the glass, splattering yellow pus across the panes. "I don't think I want pie anymore," Dunford said as he choked down the rising bile. "Well, the hell with knocking," Jason said between gags. "Those things are making enough noise to draw down anything in that place." "Yeah, agreed," Murphy said, his face twisted in disgust. "Should be easy enough." The sudden crack of splintering wood and shattering glass interrupted Jason mid-sentence. With a thunderous crash, the doors broke away. Zombies poured out of the shop, tumbling over each other and falling into a writhing pile of decayed flesh and putrid fluids. "Jeffries!" Murphy shouted. "Move!" His warning came too late. Corporal Braden Jeffries had been too close to the narrow porch when the mass of squirming bodies rolled out. Decayed, bony hands grabbed his legs, tumbling him to the ground. His rifle belched out a 3-round burst of 5.56 millimeter bullets that punched holes into the building, but did nothing to stop the inevitable. Creatures fell on him before he could scream, raking deep gashes into his face. Sharp, jagged teeth tore through his trousers, bright red blood blossoming across the calf of his desert camouflage MCCUUs. He pushed the biter in his face away, only to have another creature clamp down on his fingers, ripping the digits off with a stomach-churning crunch. "Braden!" Dunford screamed. He rushed forward in time to see arterial blood fountain into the air as a piece of his throat was torn away. "Titan, kill!" Murphy shouted. He charged into the scrum, drawing his e-tool and embedding it into the first creature he encountered. He ripped his weapon free, sending bits of sizzling brains skyward. He brought the weapon down between the shoulder blades of a zombie with its teeth clamped onto Jeffrey's leg, ripping the thing away with a jerk. With a stomp of his boot heel to the zombie's temple, the monster stilled. Titan launched into the undead pile, clamping his powerful jaws around the first zombie head he encountered. With a vicious snarl, he dispatched the creature with frightening efficiency before moving on to his next kill. Jason bounded up to the deck as a lone male creature trudged its way through the obliterated door. Holstering his pistol and drawing his K-bar, he plunged the blade upward through the monster's eye, lodging it deep into its skull. Movement from the corner of his eye drew his attention back to the store opening as another shambler stumbled across the threshold. Fluidly, he drew his pistol and fired 3 shots in rapid succession into another creature making its way outside. Clotted blood and brains sprayed across the walls as the bullets tore through its head, sizzling as it broke down into thick slime. Dunford threw the creatures from his dying friend until he could pull Jeffries free. He dragged the man away from the pile of bodies while Murphy and Jason continued to destroy the creatures, with a little help from Titan. He dropped to his knees, pulling a pressure dressing from his first aid pack, and pressed it down on Jeffrey's open throat wound. The dressing soaked through in seconds, leaving Dunford scrambling to find more. Jeffries grabbed Dunford's hand in his own and shook his head, eyes brimming with tears. Jeffries reached to his holster and drew his sidearm. He glanced over at the melee and back to Dunford. "Go," he mouthed. "Screw you, man," Dunford cried. "Not yet!" With the last of his energy, Jeffries shoved his friend away, sending Dunford tumbling backward onto his ass. Before Dunford could recover, Jeffries shoved his pistol into his mouth. He nodded at his friend one last time and fired. Jason snapped his head around at the loud pop to find Jeffries laying still in a rapidly growing pool of blood. Dunford sat beside him, holding his hand with a blank stare on his face. "Fuck!" Jason screamed, his throat dry. "Fuck, fuck, fuck!" He slammed his gloved fist against the wall with each utterance until he dropped his head against it. An old dead man slowly emerged from the dark store, dried and rotted intestines swaying from a huge gash in its gut. Its torn and blood-soaked hemp clothing dragged along the ground behind it. It clacked its teeth together with loud pops, anticipating the warm flesh in front of it. It reached for his face, raking its blood-stained fingernails through the air. It didn't stand a chance. Jason narrowed his eyes at the creature, his teeth clenched as his entire body shook. As the tip of the zombie's clawed finger brushed his shoulder, Jason unleashed his fury. With a twist of his body, he spun the creature into an arm lock. Its elbows splintered with a loud crack as Jason brought his fist down onto the joint. He moved the creature into a hammerlock, forcing the arm behind the thing's back and up until its shoulder dislocated with a loud snap. Jason punched the thing between its shoulder blades, sending it tumbling against the building's wall. It started to turn toward him, its lips curled back in a snarl. Jason's fist caught it straight in its ear, bouncing the thing's head against the wall. He rained blows down onto its skull until the bone audibly cracked and pus-colored brain oozed from its nostrils. "Foster!" Murphy screamed, breaking through Jason's murderous rage. "It's dead!" Jason stepped back, allowing the thing to slide down to the ground. It slowly crumpled onto the deck, leaving a trail of dissolved brain tissue streaking across the wall. Jason spun on his heel, driving the back of his boot straight into the creature's face with a backward kick that shattered what was left of its features. "Dial it back, brother," Murphy said calmly, putting his hand on Jason's shoulder. "I'll search these things. Dunford needs you." Jason stood still, breathing heavily through tightened jaws. He stepped away, dreading the impending sight of yet another man who had died under his command. He turned from the carnage he had wrought and made his way over to the body of his fallen Marine. Dunford sat cross-legged next to Jeffrey's body, staring. It's pretty horrific, I whispered with a shudder. It is what it is, he shrugged. Well, at least we learned something from it, I said. What's that? The screamers are also the black-eyed ones. Yeah, very true. Interesting tidbit, but we still have no idea where they came from and how they fit into the scheme of things. I know, I whispered almost to myself. Should we get everyone back on the bus? I feel more comfortable with eyes on the outside. I'm pretty sure I saw windows upstairs, and I'd like to get someone on overwatch. Plus, I'd like to know if there are any more Zeds waiting for us up there, he said quietly. Besides, if this bleach works, the second floor will be the best place for us to hole up till we can fix the beast. Yeah, good point, I replied. And Joe and I can check the second floor before anyone else comes up. No, he said. Matt, Mark, and Joe can handle that. Your hands are bleeding again, and Rosa would string me up by the short hairs if I let you tear your hands up any more than you already have. I'm fine, I protested. I can still carry a rifle. It's not open for debate, he said, as we started creeping our way back to the bus. I want Lexi to go up there once everything's clear. That girl can pick out a crow at midnight. She should be able to tell us what's happening out there. I really hate that you keep using her this much. She's still just a teenager, I whispered, shaking my head. Don't let her hear you say that, he smiled. Yeah, no kidding. My ears are still ringing from the last time I called her a kid. But still, how did she know? Did I get someone in trouble? Her eyes shot to mine, a shadow of guilt spreading across her face. No, I suppose not. I just don't talk about those days very much. Because of that girl? She asked, as she unwound the gauze from my right hand. You know about that too, huh? I know that's how you got this scar, she said, running her finger across the back of my hand. I know when you're stressed, you rub the spot raw. Don't get mad at Lexi. I pressured her to... They were unarmed and uncoordinated. They were so slow, we should have been able to just pick them off like target practice. Looking back, it was a shitstorm from the start. Not kidding, Murphy said, turning the skewer around. The meat sizzled over the flames, grease dancing over the blackened flesh. We were a few hours into the shit when evacuation started. By that time, our own people started to turn. My family was on the first round of choppers heading out. Sounded like the pilot turned mid-flight and attacked the co-pilot. They went down with everyone on board. I don't know. Stop, Murphy interrupted. There's nothing that can be said. After I heard what happened, I walked away. I am ashamed of it, but I walked away from it all. I saw the writing on the wall. There was no winning against what we were fighting. I went back to that house and waited to die. I put my sidearm to my head more times than I care to remember. What stopped you? Jason asked, instantly regretting the question as the words rolled off his tongue. You guys, actually. Murphy took the skewer from the flames. He took his knife, cutting the meat and skewer into 2 equal halves. He handed one to Jason while biting into his own. Jason bit down hungrily into the burnt flesh, savoring the warm meat as it damn near melted in his mouth. He swallowed and dove into another bite before the first piece hit his stomach. He hadn't realized how truly hungry he was, and he was ready to devour the whole meal without coming up for air. There was comfort in the process of cleaning his weapon. The action of maintaining his rifle allowed him to remove himself from the big picture for a short while. This time, however, he could find no such comfort. His mind would not calm. His thoughts would not silence. After 10 minutes of trying, he finally gave up and reassembled his M4 carbine rifle. He glanced back over at his sleeping companions again. Jason was restless, his head rocking from side to side, hands and feet twitching. Murphy, the woman he'd ever met. Good morning, she whispered, as she rejoined him under their heavy wrappings. Did you miss me? You know I did, he smiled. Where have you been? I brought you something, she said, producing 2 granola bars from under the blankets. It's not bacon and eggs, but it's the best breakfast in bed I could come up with. You just made my morning. How'd I get so lucky? I have a thing for big men with southern accents, she responded. You're kind of cute, too. That helps. I wish I could have met you before all this, he said, before biting down on the chocolate chip granola bar. My brother would have loved you." Joe turned his eyes from Rosa, his heart falling as his mind's eye turned to old images of family that he would never have the chance to speak to again. "Was he in Washington, too?" Rosa asked, her caring tone filled with concern. "Yeah," Joe sighed. "He was out visiting our parents when everything went to hell. I'd messaged him a few times before we lost a signal. That's when we learned about the bomb." "I'm so sorry, Joe," Rosa said. She took his hand in hers. "You know, it's funny how things turn out. I really had no plans on sticking it out with Chris. I only came by that morning to check on him before heading out to D.C. myself. He wanted to go to the gun store in town, and I didn't want him to go alone. Then I heard Dan was on his way to the farm with his family, and I thought I would wait them out to make sure he was okay. Then you guys showed up, and I didn't want to leave Chris alone with strangers. When Dan was shot and that horde showed up, I knew I wasn't going anywhere." "Would you think I was too selfish if I said I'm glad you stayed?" Rosa questioned. "Not at all," Joe smiled. "Everything happens for a reason. When I lost my family, I didn't think I had anything left to live for. Now my last thought when I fall asleep and the first thought I have when I wake up is about you. It's strange, but if the world hadn't come to an end, we'd have never met." Her tears spilled over her cheeks and across her trembling smile. She let out a muffled laugh before throwing her arms around him and locking him into a deep, passionate kiss. He held her tight, closing his eyes and losing himself in her embrace. He felt her breath on his neck, her hair gently grazing his cheek. When he opened his eyes again, he saw Dan across the room. At that moment, Joe understood. Even though he only met Rosa a few weeks prior, a deep love had formed between them. He started to understand Dan's emotional state much more clearly than before. He knew it had been hard for his friend, but until that moment he couldn't fathom the depth of pain the man was living through. "What's wrong?" Rosa asked as she pulled away. She turned around, leaning against him and laying her head in his chest. "Nothing at all," he said, taking her hand in his. "I was just thinking about everything. But mostly I'm thinking about how happy I am right now." "You were thinking about Dan and Abby, weren't you?" "Guilty," he answered. "When did you take up mind reading?" "Well, I didn't think you were suddenly staring off at Dan for his good looks." "Oh, you think Dan is good looking, huh?" "Stop it," she said, slapping his arm playfully. "Hey now, I'm still healing," he teased. "How was he last night?" "A little better, I think. Getting away from that farm was a good thing for him. I think he needed quiet time with his daughter." "Yeah, good to hear. Did he find anything interesting in that book?" "Maybe," Rosa replied, "but it would be better to hear it from him or Chris." "Someone say my name." Chris strode in, limping slightly from the injury he had earned the day before. He walked as softly as he could with his outdoor boots on the old wooden floor. "I thought I heard voices," he said through his half-chewed granola bar. "Rosa was just telling me that Dan found something useful in that notebook." "Yeah, maybe," Chris replied. "But something else is bothering me right now. It looks like every Zed that ate that screamer is outside right now, and they were all laid out on the ground around the body." "Are they dead?" Rosa asked with hints of hope in her tone. "I don't think they're any more dead than they were yesterday," Chris replied. "We see them move once in a while, so they're still alive-ish. But they're just lying there like they're sleeping." "That's a good thing, right?" It was Joe's turn to sound hopeful. "I mean, we can kill them from up here and not have to worry about them moving around." "That would be a bad idea," Chris replied, shaking his head. "There's movement everywhere out there. Either the scream or the smell of that screamer's brain juice brought in a lot of curious corpses. I'm hoping they'll eventually move on, but the ones just lying on the ground out there, that's something new. New things make me nervous. My gut's telling me we're not going to like what's next." "Buddy, I hope you're wrong," Joe said as he unraveled himself from the blanket pile. "'Cause we're not going anywhere until I get that plow up off the ground." "I know. If you can pull yourself away from your lovely woman for a few minutes, I think we may need to get started on it sooner rather than later." "I suppose I can start cutting things off," Joe nodded. "But that's going to leave the front end exposed. We'd have to go even slower than yesterday, and we still haven't fixed the problem with the fumes. Yeah, I was thinking about that. How long will it take to put something together to keep us breathing? Chris glanced back out into the area on the other side of the plastic curtain. He nodded at someone before turning his attention back to Joe. Not long. I just need to unblock the vents. Maybe 10 minutes for that, depending on the damage. Another hour to disassemble the front plow blades. I could knock a lot of time off if I just cut it off, but it'll take a hell of a lot longer to fix later. We may have to chance it, Chris replied, his attention again drawn to the other side of the curtain. Chris, are we in trouble? Joe stood, helping Rosa to her feet. He fingered his Desert Eagle on his hip as he tried to read Chris's face. Like I said, Chris shot a quick glance at him. There is a lot of movement out there. Can I do anything? Rosa asked, her trembling voice betraying the fear she was trying to suppress. I can use an extra pair of hands with that plow, Joe said, pulling her close to him. Can you use Mark for that? Chris asked. Rosa is the closest thing we have to a doctor. I don't want her to cut her hands up playing mechanic. You've got a point, babe, Joe sighed. I'm not a helpless little girl, you know, she snapped. I've worked on my own car for years. I never said you were, Chris replied. With Dan out of commission, we're going to need every able-bodied person to help get everyone out of here if things go south. The creature relented, moving back to where it began. One of the creatures suddenly stepped to the center of the circle, its heavy construction boots crushing the bones of the girl into the snow with audible pops. Its wide hard hat gleamed, rust-colored splotches staining its reflective orange vest and brown coat underneath. A heavy hammer hung on its side, secured by a tool belt strapped to the creature's waist. It turned to face each of the other four, growling wildly at each of them in turn. The edge of the throng. Like with the other strange creatures, the zombies opened a path for the female monster to pass. She glided through the crowd, stopping when she neared the middle of the press of dead. The circle of flesh opened up around her as the shambling corpses created a space for her to stand. She slouched, legs slightly apart and arms hanging straight down. Her head hung low, silky black hair dangling over her face and swirling in the howling wind. Her haunting visage froze the breath in Joe's lungs. What the hell was that? Mark gasped. Don't ask me, man. I just work here, Joe replied, unable to take his eyes from the dead woman. Hardhat appeared to relax, standing upright and allowing his hands to fall to his sides. He turned his head slowly from left to right, scanning across the horde that surrounded him like a general surveying his troops. Slowly his head turned upward, eyes tracking along the wall, until they fell on the spectators above. Dozens of heads followed, eyes turning up until the gaze of Death's Legion were upon the four living souls in the uncovered window. "Oh my God!" Lexi squeaked. "Joe," Chris started. "I know," Joe replied. "Already moving. Move faster. I know, Mark, I need your help." "I mean it," Chris was near shouting as he unslung his rifle. "I know," Joe shouted back as he bounded down the stairs with Mark in tow. I woke up long before Chris came in to grab Joe and Rosa and lead them away. I decided to just stay quiet. It seemed like the two were having a private moment. Katie still slept in my lap, and I was perfectly content where I was. Well, content except for the fact that it was yet another morning, waking up freezing my ass off. It's happened so often in my life that if I woke up warm, I would probably think I died in my sleep and ended up in the wrong place. Though, for everything I've done since the day someone pressed the shiny red Apocalypse Start button, maybe that hot place is where I should end up. And knowing my luck, the devil sleeps with the window open too. Needless to say, when Chris led them out, it wasn't a moment too soon. As much as I tried to ignore them, there's only so much I can block out when the world is so quiet you can hear a fly fart from across a room. Even when the wind started picking up outside, it didn't do much to drown out what they were saying. It may have been the fact that I didn't really want to hear them gushing over each other so soon after losing Abby, but the two of them are so sickeningly sweet on each other, I may have become diabetic just listening to them. The numbing effect of the cold was less welcome on my feet than on my hands. My toes still burned whenever they got cold, and had been that way since the first night when Abby and I took shelter in that old barn. I wanted to ask Rosa about it, but after the way she tortured me after my gunshot, I decided it's best to only complain about the big stuff. Rosa is a lovely person, but as a caretaker, she could very well kill me with kindness. The only blessing was the cold had numbed my hands somewhat. They still felt like overinflated balloons, and there was a very unpleasant sting whenever I had to move my fingers. But at least I still could move my fingers, a silver lining, I guess. Any bit of good news you can find when you're the main course in a global all-you-can-eat buffet is welcome. Despite it all, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had my daughter back. Katie did not flee from me in the middle of the night. The fact that she came to me at all made me happier than I thought I had any right to be. Sometime that morning, while listening to the makings of a bad romance novel across the room, I'd come to accept that no matter how hard I tried, or how much people around me worked to help me through things, my emotional state would be measured moment by moment. There was no perfect cure for grief, and I had to figure out mine while living every second of life on constant high alert. I'm not sure what led to that epiphany. Wow, another big word in 2 days. Abby would be impressed. Maybe reading Graydon's journal helped me process everything. Reading his thoughts helped me think a few things through. Misery loving company and all. I looked down at Katie's sleeping face for the 100th time that morning. It was nothing short of a miracle that I hadn't lost her the previous day, and we were able to get away from the farm with only a damaged bus. I might have said God was watching out for us, but if he'd been paying any attention at all, the dead would stay in their coffins where they belonged, and I would be sitting at home with my family intact and enjoying a huge plate of bacon. Not saying I'm losing my faith, but me and the big guy are on opposite sides of the fence on this whole dead walking the earth thing.
Daddy, why are you staring at me?
Katie's tiny voice floated through her blanket cocoon. She hadn't opened her eyes, and had she not spoken, I would have assumed she was still sleeping. How did you know I was staring?
'Cause you're breathing on me. Your breath smells icky.
I bet it does, I replied with a smile. We forgot our toothbrushes at the farm. I leaned in to kiss her forehead, but her hand shot out from under the blanket, catching me right in the mouth.
No kisses. You smell really icky.
Way to shatter a guy's ego, kid, I laughed.
Ego?
She asked, sitting up from her blanket nest.
I want waffles.
I said ego, not ego. I rubbed the top of her head. She returned a dejected look, laying her head back down on my chest.
I wanted waffles,
she said sadly. I'm sorry, Katie, I replied. It killed me to see her so sad, especially over something I could have easily remedied before the dead started hunting us to near extinction. When we can, I'll see if I can find some waffles.
Okay,
she replied.
Can I share them with my cousin?
Of course you can. Jane, too.
Jane is my sister. We said so yesterday.
Oh, you did, huh? Well, I suppose I could adopt her. But what about Lexi?
She's a grown-up. She can be my aunt, like Aunt Anna or Aunt Rosa.
Whatever you say, Katie, I replied, trying not to laugh. I thought about trying to explain how the whole family org chart worked, but decided against it. She was a tired and cold 6-year-old. I would have had better luck explaining the wonders of bacon to a vegetarian. Mental note, what do vegetarians that become zombies actually eat? I knew something was terribly wrong when Rosa suddenly flew into the room, her face ghostly white. She went straight to Matt, violently shaking his shoulder until he came close to sliding from his seat. He shot to his feet as she whispered in his ear, stumbling over himself as he ran across the room and out through the plastic flap. Katie, I said, as I extricated us from our cotton wrappings, go to Aunt Anna. Daddy has to go talk to Uncle Chris.
About waffles?
She perked up again. You got a one-track mind, Katie, I said, trying to hide the building anxiety burning through me like molten steel.
I like waffles.
I'll see what I can do, I said as I stood. I turned to head out to see what was going on, but stopped short of running out the flap. I turned back to Katie, scooping her up. Daddy loves you. You behave, okay?
Okay, Daddy.
Anna nodded to me with pursed lips, mind-numbing dread written all over her face. Katie dove into the pile of blankets with the rest of the kids, oblivious of the rapidly building tension in the room. I nodded back and sped out the door, flap. It was as if I'd stepped into the world's crappiest snow globe. Huge flakes blew through the broken-out windows, shooting across the room and out the other side. Snow piles built up all over the floor, swirling around in the brisk wind. I suddenly realized the entire building had been open to the elements for a very long time, and the floors were probably about as safe as walking on the roof of a backyard shed. Now there is a performance I had no intention of repeating. Mark and Lexi stood at one of the openings opposite from me, with Chris and Joe at any moment. "Lexi," I said as calm as possible. I moved to her, putting my arm around her despite my still aching shoulder. "You need to calm down and breathe before you pass out." "How the hell can I calm down?" she cried, pushing me away. "There's only one way out of here, and the zombies are in front of it." "There's not so many we can't shoot them," I replied. "That may not be an option," Chris chimed in. "I can guarantee there are more out there we can't see. Our ammo situation is not quite dire, but it's far from comforting." "We're trapped!" Lexi cried. "We'll work it out." I tried to soothe her as I shot Chris an evil eye. "But not until you calm down. Go sit down with your sister. Katie's with her, and I'd feel a lot better if you were in there with them." I'm sure she recognized the dismissal for what it was, but she seemed thankful for the chance to escape. Watching her stand there terrified once again reminded me that even though she had matured a great deal in the short time that I'd known her, she was still just a kid. She walked away, heading back to our little refugee center without objection. She stopped at the flap, looking back at me with terrified eyes. Licking her lips, she shot me a forced smile before disappearing into the other room. "Okay," I exhaled once I was sure she was out of earshot. "On the monster scale, how hosed are we?" "We're at full-blown Godzilla," Chris replied. "She's right. They're massing around the front door, and there's a couple more screamers out there." "Awesome. When did they get here?" "They already were, but they weren't screamers yet." "Okay, Chris, I feel like I'm missing some of the story here. Care to enlighten?" "Those things out there fed on the little girl from last night. Somehow the trait was passed on." "You're shitting me. Tell me you're just getting me back for that clown thing." "Afraid not." "So first we kill the regular undead, and we end up releasing spores into the air that makes more walking coffin stuffers. Now we kill a screamer, and a day later we get more screamers?" "Afraid so." "Am I the only one seeing a trend here?" "At least it looks like the screamers don't like competition. There were more, but they had some kind of dominant showdown. The one in the hard hat won, and most of the others left. I assume they're going to start a Zed colony of their own." "Colony?" I asked. "Colony, pack, pride, whatever you want to call it. I wouldn't be surprised if over time every normal Zed will be following one of those howlers." And here I was, looking forward to just a regular run-of-the-mill zombie apocalypse. I wasn't expecting version 2.0. "You can lodge a complaint later. Right now I'm thinking of an exit strategy." "Well, what did you have in mind?" I asked. Instead of answering me directly, he simply stared off. His mind had wandered to that happy place that he goes when he has some deep thinking to do. I understand it. I have my own happy place I like to visit at times, but where I would only go to my personal happy place long enough to have a beer and be back before the end of a commercial break. Chris would kick back and chill out there long enough for me to run out and grab lunch before he decided to rejoin the conversation. When he did come back, most of the time his answer was less than stellar, until he explained it. "We shoot them." "See what I mean?" "Correct me if I'm wrong, but you just said shooting them was bad," I said. "Not if we shoot the screamers," he smiled. "Like you said last night, it could work as a distraction." "We'll have to get him as far from the building as we can. Any way to lure the screamer?" "Dunno," he sighed. "Kind of playing this by ear. But I do think that once we take the shot, everyone needs to be ready to roll out of here." "Well, who's going to do the honors?" "You won't like it." "Not Lexi," I snapped. "She's the best shot we have. Joe and I will be busy driving, and we'll need everyone else to clear out any stragglers." "No," I snapped again. "You saw her. She's nearly paralyzed with fear. You'd be asking her to make an accurate shot and then run down the stairs while we're opening the doors. She'd be too exposed. I'll do it. You can't even hold your own pistol. How the hell are you going to balance a rifle? What about Anna or Rosa? Matt or Mark? Any of the adults can take that shot. We'll need every adult just to open those doors, Chris said through clenched teeth. We can't afford to lose Rosa, so she's on the bus before the doors open. Can't afford, I shouted back. Is that how you're sizing us up? Like assets based on necessity? No, I'm trying to make logical decisions based on high probability of survival without letting my emotions dictate my actions. Well, it sounds like the same goddamn thing to me. So what happens if my hands never heal and I can't shoot again? You're going to have me run across the field as bait because it would give you the highest probability of survival? In that case, why not send Faith out there? That's a cheap shot and you know it. I'm not the one gambling with a teenager's life. Neither am I. She's capable and a survivor. She can do this. Yeah, and if it goes south, I growled, what then? Will you just call it acceptable losses? I've already lost Abby. I almost lost Katie yesterday. Now you're asking me to let you put a girl who's just as much a daughter to me as Katie in danger? I'll do it, Lexi said timidly. I spun on my heels to find her standing behind me. Her eyes were locked to the floor, her face flushed from crying. No, you won't, I ordered. I'll be up here and you'll be down there on the bus. What are you not getting here, Dan? Chris barked. You saw what's out there. We may not even make it out of here if we don't get moving, and you're sitting there arguing against the only plan that makes sense. What makes sense about it? I shouted, spinning around to face Chris. She can shoot from the bus while you guys get the doors open. I'm not letting her stay up here alone. Whoa, dudes. Matt suddenly appeared at the top of the stairs. Everything cool up here? Yeah, it is, Chris replied. The plan is what it is, and that's the one we're sticking with. Lexi takes the shot. Everyone else is downstairs to either open the door or provide cover. Who the hell put you in charge? I snapped. You did, he shot back. You came to my house for help. You brought your family to me to keep them safe. Don't ask me to protect your family and then question my decisions. Protect my family, I shouted. You brought Adam into my life. You didn't let me kill him. You missed a huge blind spot on your own land. Abby and I would have been safer on our own. I'd screwed up. I knew the moment the words rolled off my tongue. Chris moved at me with a rage I had never seen in him before. It was an indescribably cold fury that had my blood running cold. I didn't even know his fist had connected with my face until I was on the floor. Dan! Anna gasped behind me. What's going on here? Rosa asked as she emerged from the other room with the kids in tow. Katie ran to me, throwing her arms around my neck and burying her face in my chest as she sobbed. Too far, Dan, Matt admonished. Way too far, dude. Stop it, Lexi cried. Abby was no one's fault. Just stop it, please. No, Lexi. Chris was monotone and cold. He's right. I should have seen it, but I didn't. I will carry that with me forever. Dan, no one should ever have to go through what you did, but you've taken it too far. You've murdered someone and hoof it back to the bus. Joe. No, Dan, please, for once, do what you're told. I really don't want to talk to you right now. He climbed into the bus without waiting for a response. On the plus side, I didn't have to worry about the chill in the air. The cold shoulder I was getting froze me right to my soul, if I still had one at that point. Not saying I didn't deserve it, but these guys really knew how to serve up a plate of guilt with a big pile of Dan fucked up on the side. I started to walk toward Matt and Anna by the doors when everyone suddenly froze. The bowel-emptying screams outside came from everywhere, as if the sound bounced between the bricks and the hollow space. The deep bellow of the male creature's voice intertwined with the higher screech of the female. It was impossible to determine what side of the building it came from. The door came under immediate assault. Wet thuds of bodies slammed against the ancient wood. The double doors rocked on their hinges under the immense pressure exerted on them from the collection of dead flesh on the other side. "Get to the door!" Joe screamed as he bolted out of the bus. "Mark, no more time! Get down! We're leaving!" Mark didn't have to be told twice. He shimmied down the back of the bus, landing with a grunt on the cold concrete floor. "I got the vents open," he panted. "Backup cameras busted all to shit." "We'll wing it," Joe said. "Get to the door. When you're back to pick up out, get on the radio and guide me out." "Done," Mark called back as he sprinted toward the door. "What the hell you waiting for, son?" Joe snapped at me. "That door ain't going to move itself." The male creature's scream was cut short when the sharp crack of Lexi's rifle snuffed out the inhuman sound. Footsteps upstairs raced from one side of the building to the other. The female barely had time to get out a small yelp before another crack sent her back to the grave she should have stayed in. "That!" I said, pointing up. Everything suddenly went quiet. The dead that were trying to tear the doors from their hinges only moments before had gone silent. From outside came the dragging shuffle of dead feet plowing through snow as they moved away. Moments later, their fierce growls returned, grunting with animalistic fervor. "Go!" Chris shouted as he bounded down the stairs, Lexi hot on his heels. "They're taking the bait, but those screams brought a whole lot more." I took off running full speed to the door. Joe suddenly appeared beside me, as did Chris a second later. Ripping the chain from the handles, we pulled against them with everything we had in us. Matt, Anna, and Mark on one side, with me, Chris, and Joe on the other. That tiny spark of hope flared up inside me once again. That hope that something is finally going right for a change. The opening widened enough to peer outside into the blizzard and see most of the creatures moving away in different directions. The plan was going well. Then it all went wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong. Years of neglect and the immense buildup of rust must have taken its toll on the iron hinges. They bore the strain of opening the heavy doors once, but would not stand up to a second use. The snap was like a huge firecracker went off inside the wall as the top hinge broke free. As the door tilted away from the wall, the bottom hinge gave way. Matt and Anna managed to get clear before it came crashing down on its edge. Mark did not. He screeched in pain as the full weight of the ancient wooden door came down on both feet. Only his body, pressed against the door, managed to keep it from falling back and crushing him. Instead, it tilted forward, falling flat on the ground outside with a deafening thud and sending plumes of snow into the air. We rushed to him, lifting the wood from his feet. He leaned on Joe, his screams piercing through the howling winter storm. We managed to lift the door enough to allow Mark to fall to the ground. His feet were crushed, blood seeping through the tears in the tough leather boots. Creatures on the periphery of the horde that had not joined the dead screamer feast were drawn to Mark's cries of pain and our frantic attempt to save him. They massed in front of us, growing wild at the sight of his warm blood flowing from his mangled boots. "Joe, Matt, get to the vehicles," Chris ordered. "Get Mark there, too." "No!" Mark shouted through his tears. He winced as he moved, pulling his rifle from his back. "You guys need to cover. Get the trucks outside and then get me inside." "Mark!" I snapped. "I swear I'll shoot the first of you assholes that touches me." Mark screamed as he lined up the sights on his Keltec and started firing. A woman in her mid-20s spun inside as soon as we had parked. I slipped my hammer into my empty pistol holder before reaching for one of the rifles stacked neatly by the battery shelves. "I've got it," Anna said sharply as she hefted it up and away from my grasp. Rosa forcefully shoved a bundle of blankets and sleeping bags into my arms. She handed Katie a couple of pillows before returning to the back of the bus to grab a box of MREs. "I can help carry some of the heavier stuff," I volunteered. "No," Rosa replied sharply. "Your hands are bleeding again. You don't need to do any more damage than you've already done." She glared at me for a moment longer than needed before turning away. I didn't miss the barely hidden message in her words. With blankets and pillows in hand and Katie in tow, we stepped out into an Arctic blast of winter's fury. The wind hit me with such ferocity my breath was momentarily torn from my lungs. The snow bit at my uncovered face like thousands of tiny ice picks needling at my exposed skin. Grabbing my daughter's hand, I dropped my head and plowed through the storm. It was only about 15 feet to the building's open side door, but it felt like half a mile in the howling winds. Katie felt more like an anchor than a little girl, pulling back against me as we walked. I stepped through the open door and felt the temperature suddenly rise in the darkened space. It was more than just a shelter from the wind. There was an ambient heat that seemed much warmer than it should for an abandoned building. I turned to check on Katie and suddenly discovered why she felt so heavy. Like a daisy chain, 3 little girls were linked together hand in hand. Katie held Faith's hand, with Jane following behind her. Without knowing it, I had dragged all 3 of the kids along through the snow. "When did you guys show up?" I asked as I stomped my feet to knock snow free.
Lexi said we should all go together,
Jane said in her tiny voice. Lexi suddenly appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from tears that had just recently ceased. She held her rifle in her hands, a backpack full of what sounded like canned goods slung lazily over her shoulder. She pushed past me, making her way up a narrow flight of stairs before disappearing into a dimly lit doorway on her right. I followed her up the steps, towing the convoy of children behind me. The door behind me clicked shut as Rosa and Anna stepped inside, stomping the snow from their boots. As soon as we made it to the top of the stairs, I was shocked to see how wrong I had been about the place being abandoned. Every aspect of the apartment looked new. Several camping lanterns had been set throughout the rooms, illuminating the fresh peach-colored paint on the walls to the thick rose-colored carpet on the floor. A floral print sofa and love seat occupied the middle of the living room, adorned with several plush throw pillows. A lazy Susan, filled with individually wrapped candies, sat atop the dark wood coffee table, sitting in front of the long, high-backed sofa. The walls were lined with shelves, each with their own sets of precious moment statues, carefully placed atop their own individual doily. Yes, I know what precious moment statues are. I'm not proud of it. Let's move on. Several framed pictures of people young and old hung from the walls, spaced between various floral paintings. A light orange glow danced from what I assume was the kitchen. The hiss of a gas stove filled the silence in an apartment that felt like a shrine to the grandmas and grandpas of the world. "Stoves?" I asked. "Propane," Chris answered, simply, without looking at me. "I saw the tank outside." He lay his rifle against the wall before walking out of the room. Moments later, a toilet flushed somewhere in the back of the apartment. "Waterworks, too," I said, to anyone that would listen. Not a single person acknowledged me. Despite the increasing warmth filling the stale air, there was a stifling chill in the room. Mark's death had taken everyone's already raw emotions and rubbed a healthy dose of rock salt into the still open wounds. Lexi sat in the love seat, weeping silently. Rosa sat beside her again, pulling Lexi to her shoulder and letting the girl cry. Lexi looked up at me with her red, swollen eyes before shaking her head and burying her face into Rosa's shoulder. Rosa shot me an icy stare before turning her eyes from me as if I was a visage of the devil himself. "Katie," I whispered as I bent down to look at her face to face. "Daddy is going to the apartment across the hall. I need to fix something, and I don't want to bother anyone. Can you be a big girl and keep Faith and Jane company?" "Uh-huh," she said sleepily as she rubbed her eyes with tiny balled fists. "That's my girl," I said, as I peeled her hat from her head and stuffed it into her coat pocket. I kissed her on the head before standing again. As Katie walked over to the other kids, I turned away from the group to head across the hall. "Take this," Anna said coldly. I looked back to find her standing behind me, a lantern, blanket, and can of soup in her outstretched arms. "The stove is already on in there. Eat something and get some rest." I barely had her offerings in hand before she spun around and vanished into the kitchen. I lowered my head as I walked out of the apartment and across the narrow hall and into the adjacent space. The apartment next door was also new construction, but far more toned down than the Andy Griffith nightmare next door. A thick blue carpet stretched across the floor, standing out against the apartment's fresh white paint. Empty shelves lined the walls of the unfurnished living room, a fine layer of dust covering the slick varnished surfaces. White curtains hung in the windows facing the street below. I drew the curtain back to get a better view of the area in the mid-afternoon light. Chris's truck sat on the street below, a thin blanket of snow in its bed and atop the still-connected trailer. Across the street, a mostly empty parking lot was vanishing under the snow. A single-story storage unit sat next to the lot, its bright green garage doors standing out brilliantly against the snowy white background. Beyond that, there was nothing but an open field and a dense tree line swaying in the distance. I walked into the kitchen, peeling the lid off the can of tomato soup. I wondered if Anna gave me tomato, knowing how much I hate the stuff, but I was afraid if I brought it up, the group would banish me to the bus to sleep. So I heated it up over the propane-fed flames and prepared myself for the warm meal of red vomit in a can. I took a seat on the living room floor, listening to the hushed voices across the hall. I heard Lexi's sobs and Rosa and Joe doing their best to console her. I listened to the kids talking, trying to make sense of everything in a way only children could. I could hear Jane telling Katie that her Uncle Mark would be happy now, because he's with Abby and her parents. Faith barely spoke, and when she did, her voice was flat and empty. Faith worried me. As an adult, I was close to cracking up and booking a one-way trip to a padded cell. While the other two kids were affected, Faith seemed more sensitive to what was happening around her. I know Chris saw it too. The concern on his face was plain as day when he watched her. Chris and Matt were arguing over the best method to secure the building for a longer stay in case we were snowed in for a while. Matt wanted to be on the move as soon as the sun came up the next day. Chris felt that staying put and regrouping was the better option while the bus was getting repaired. I stood up and peeled my coat off shortly after finishing my can of what could loosely be called soup. I picked up my blanket and headed off to the bathroom. I was covered in blood, brain sludge, and a mass of other bodily fluids I didn't care to think about, and the water was still working. I can honestly say that it was the coldest shower I ever remember taking in my life. Shrinkage? I'm talking full-on frightened turtle. It didn't help that it took nearly half an hour to scrub the gore from every inch of my body. Chatting with. Intel would be a nice thing to have at present. Maybe, Murphy replied hesitantly. Jason didn't miss the hesitation. A spark of suspicion ignited as his internal bullshit meter started to ping. He didn't like when people suddenly acted outside of their normal behavior, especially when they were in a dangerous situation. I'm on point, he whispered, shaking the suspicion from his mind for the time being. Copy that, Murphy whispered. Tighten, heel. Jason rose on his haunches, forcing the glass door open just enough to get a clear view into the station's shop. The foul stench of rot and decay assailed him as warm, dank air rushed out to greet him. His vision blurred as his eyes watered at the gut-churning smell. Jason pulled his face away, taking a couple deep breaths before re-engaging. He flipped on his flashlight and breached the building, sweeping the red beam from left to right across the room. Dust particles danced in the light as they flittered through the air down on him as the skull started to move. His terror rose into mindless panic as he watched the strands of neck muscle contract as the monster clumsily moved its near-fleshless head. Bones scraped on the tiled floor as it tilted its eyeless gaze upward, strands of thickened blood slowly drizzling down from the side of its bony face. Jawbones popped and cracked as its few remaining facial muscles forced its maw open. Unable to move, it simply lay there, mouth open in Jason's direction as if it tried to will Jason's warm flesh into its mouth. Oh my God! He gagged before the vomit forced its way out. He turned away, retching up the few rations he had left in his stomach. He put a hand on the wall to support himself, doubling over as his stomach tightened and his mind reeled. The unbridled insanity of what he'd just witnessed overwhelmed him as he felt his consciousness begin to slip away. "Foster!" Murphy boomed. He heard Titan's nails clicking on the tiled floor. His arm was suddenly hoisted around Murphy's shoulder as he was led away from the madness. His eyes blurred, black spots swirling in the periphery of his vision as his head suddenly felt very heavy. "I got you, brother. Breathe, goddammit! Jason, breathe!" Chapter 23. I was drained. My tanks were empty both emotionally and physically as I drove the lonely road back to the only family I had left. The cold bit at me, chilling my bones despite the heat blowing in the truck's cabin. My fingers throbbed, hands burning inside my gloves as blood continued to ooze from the open gashes. My head swam as I tried to focus on my driving. I wanted to cry or scream, anything that would help me feel human again. Inside, I was dead as the corpses walking the earth. I didn't know if anyone else was alive besides the small group I'd left behind in the apartment. How many were trying to survive in the new wilderness with the dead nipping at their heels? I hoped I would have gotten at least one more text message or one more familiar voice on the CB radio. The lack of news from anyone haunted me. I knew it was very likely that most everyone I knew was dead. I turned on the radio, praying to find one more lone voice in the static wilderness. I wondered what happened to the man from Chicago, who'd continued to broadcast throughout our first days on the road. There was a great comfort in listening to his raspy, tired voice during the long journey to the farm. Chris had tried to tune in, but the distance from his home to Chicago had been too great. He'd never heard the man that kept my family company. I only found static. Creatures dotted the moonlit landscape, their terrible rotted visages marring what would otherwise be a beautiful snowy night. They struggled against the snow, falling over themselves as they tried to find their way. "I have seen more head trauma than I care to remember," he said, lifting his eyes to Jason again. "I've seen enough brains outside of where God intended them to be to give me nightmares to my dying day. But I have never seen brains do that before. It was like the tissue was on a frying pan. It just sizzled on the floor until it turned into chunky pea soup." "I don't know if I would have believed it," Jason said. "I'm sure some of us didn't at first. I mean, a bioengineered fungal agent designed to kill the living and raise the dead? It was like a late-night horror movie. But the people in that room weren't the kind of people that would go through that kind of trouble for a joke. This briefing was piped all over the world. This was a global special operation." "To stop the spread before it got a foothold?" Jason surmised. "Not quite," Murphy replied. "The delivery system had already been in place for some time. We were tasked—" "E-cigarettes!" Jason gasped as he finally recognized the tube Murphy had shown him. "They used e-cigs to spread this thing?" "They're close. E-cig cartridges are too heavily regulated to tamper with. Vape juice, though, that's like the Wild West. Internet's full of startup companies that make their own flavored juices." "Are you saying this was some conspiracy cooked up by vape juice makers?" Jason asked sarcastically. "No," Murphy sighed. "They didn't even know they were part of this. They just ordered their supplies like always, but didn't know some of the nicotine bottles were tampered with." "Wait," Jason interrupted again. "I thought nicotine was a controlled substance. How would that get tainted without anyone knowing it?" "It's the same thing," Murphy said. "It looks like the flavoring and additives are highly regulated and almost impossible to taint. But nicotine is shipped out from the manufacturers to distributors, who then ship the bottles to customers. The seals are easy to breach if you know what you're doing." "That seems backwards," Jason said. "Like you said, tax dollars at work." "Why vape juice, though? If it's in the nicotine, why not just lace tobacco?" Jason asked. "Cigarettes and cigars burn too hot. The spores would have been destroyed. Besides, you see the price of those cancer sticks these days? Everyone is turning to vapes or e-cigs." Jason simply nodded, mulling over all he'd heard so far. He took another swallow of beer, his head feeling lighter as the alcohol started to take effect. "There's enough spores in each one of those refill bottles to infect a city block. Every puff infects the smoker and leaves plenty of spores left over to float away in a cloud of water vapor. The infected come down with something that looks like the flu, coughing, sneezing, blowing their noses, spreading the disease. Those that got better went on with their lives, continuing to spread the infection." "How was something like that not caught?" Jason asked. "I mean, once people started getting sick, wouldn't someone have put two and two together and traced it back?" "Tampering with an unsteady, drunken feet." He swooped down, picking up his beer, and tried to take a drink. His hands shook, breaths coming so fast he couldn't drink if he tried. He ran his free hand across his stubbled head, his body racked with sobs that he could no longer subdue. "They were supposed to protect them," Murphy screamed, hurling the bottle against the wall. The brown glass exploded on impact, sending a shower of glass and beer across the store. "They promised they'd be safe," he screamed again, kicking over a stand of beef jerky. Jason sat in silence as his companion raged, his thoughts again turning to his own family, anger bubbling up from the pit of his stomach until he could no longer hold in his own burning question. "How long did we know?" Jason growled. "It doesn't matter," Murphy slurred, falling back into his chair. "It matters to me," Jason snapped. "You're sitting here telling me that we knew this shit was coming, and I want to know how long we knew." 3 months. 3 fucking months? Jason asked slowly, his voice smoldering with rage. "We knew this shit was happening for 3 months and do jack shit to stop it? Explain that to me." "'Cause it's been spreading for over a year." "What? How?" Jason's anger instantly deflated into surprised confusion. "You don't get it," Murphy said, shaking his head. "We weren't acting, we were reacting. We found this out by accident. Some data diver was experimenting with a new way to pick through metadata at the NSA, and they got a hit. It took them almost 2 weeks to discover this shit show, and almost another 2 weeks to convince the upper echelon that this was for real. Every intelligence agency across the world, friendly or otherwise, was mobilized to try to track this down and contain it. But by then it was already too late." "How did we miss this?" Jason exhaled. "How could it spread so long and us not see it?" "I don't know," Murphy exhaled. "But how—" Jason started. "I don't have all the answers," Murphy roared. "I'm just trying to understand this," Jason snapped back. "Who would do this, and why? What did they hope to gain?" "Exactly what you see," Murphy laughed maniacally. "They wanted to cleanse the earth of human life and let nature start over." "You're telling me that a bunch of tree-hugging hippies started the apocalypse?" "That's all we were told," Murphy answered in clear frustration. "We were given a mission, and I carried it out." "Which was?" "Like I said, intercept a courier and relieve him of his burdens. All his burdens." Murphy suddenly slumped into his chair, the anger and frustration melting away from his features, leaving only sorrow in its wake. "That's where we really fucked up." Jason grabbed another beer, downing the bottle in a few gulps before tossing it aside. Murphy sat with his hands clasped in front of him, his head lowered. His breath slowed, shaking as he exhaled. "Each of us were given a list. On that list were people we needed to find and remove from the playing field. It needed to be done quickly and quietly. We didn't set up teams because we were hunting individual civilians. No, we found them all right, and we killed every last one of them. Then they got up, and we killed them again, just like in the video. The video that we found out too late had been leaked on purpose." "Wait," Jason chimed in. "What do you mean, leaked on purpose?" "Whoever these people were, they were smart. Smart enough to let information out and make it look like they were trying to hide it. Every person on that list was a carrier of the trigger spore. They knew we would do everything in our power to stop them. Operators all over the world picked them off within a matter of days." "Murphy," Jason started, a cold rage building in him as he started to piece together a puzzle that he did not want to finish. "I killed one in Paris, one in Madrid, and one in D.C., and Seattle. Each one I took out led me to the next. I thought it was just because they were basically dumb civilians, but they set us up. We were supposed to find them. They wanted us to kill them." Murphy turned his head, locking his tear-filled eyes with Jason's. "I took a vial from each one I took out, the last one in San Diego." Jason stood slowly, his hands balled up and shaking. He watched Titan get to his feet, emitting a low, rumbling growl that he knew was meant for him. He didn't care. His mind was fully consumed with rage. "Titan," Murphy said weakly, "lay down." The canine complied, His narrowed eyes locked on Jason, as if daring him to move. "Say it," Jason snarled. He drew his M9 from its holster and gripped it until his knuckles whitened. "I shot them in the head. I exposed their brains to the air. I let the spores loose." "Say it," Jason demanded, leveling his pistol at Murphy's head. "I helped start this." Jason fired. Chapter 26. "What the hell were you thinking?" Chris shouted, pacing back and forth across the kitchen. "Dude, I was going to go with him," Matt snapped. "Oh yeah, that would have been better. Instead of one dumbass lost out there, we'd have to worry about two." "Calm down, buddy," Joe said, trying to defuse the situation. "We'll find him." "How?" Chris shouted again. "He's got my truck, and that bus is going nowhere." Chris spun his attention back to Matt. "Why would you leave him alone after he outright told you what he was planning?" "Well, why the hell wouldn't you tell me there was a spare key attached to the damn truck?" Matt shouted back. "Hey!" Anna snapped as she stormed into the kitchen. "You've got Katie bawling her eyes out over her dad, and the rest of the kids are freaking out. Can you tone it down?" Chris stood, closing his eyes and pinching the bridge of his nose. Taking a deep breath, he let his boiling rage cool to a low. "Come on, then. We got a lot of road to cover." "You said you have a vehicle?" Jason asked as he grabbed his gear, slinging his nearly empty pack over his shoulder and attaching his rifle to his single-point sling. "I did," Murphy smiled. "It's parked out back. I already checked the batteries and cleaned out what was left of the driver." "Nothing else out there?" Jason asked, dreading the idea of the long journey with the pungent aroma of death as a companion. "Plenty," Murphy said as they stepped back out into the store. "But none that come with its own sleeper cab." "You want to drive cross-country in a camper?" Jason eyed Murphy sarcastically. "Nope," Murphy said as he started filling his own pack with bottles of water and cans of food from the shelves. "But I can't pass up a Kenworth. No trailer, sleeper cab, plenty of leg room, tough enough to plow through those Z's with only a few scratches on the paint." "Well, at least there's plenty of room for supplies," Jason said as he started filling his own pack. "Already topped off the fuel and filled her up with as much food as she can carry and still leave room for us to sit." "Don't you ever sleep?" "Nah," Murphy chuckled. "I'll sleep when I'm—" Murphy stopped, his smile fading from his lips. "I don't sleep much." "Look, Murph," Jason started. "Don't," Murphy interrupted. "I've come to terms with what I've done. I know I'm no more to blame than any of the other operators out there that were handed this job." Jason locked his eyes with Murphy, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I was going to say that I know what happened wasn't your fault. I know you didn't know what you were doing. But I'm not ready to stop being angry, and if we're going to travel together, you're just going to have to deal with that for a while." "Fair enough," Murphy said. "I just need to know for right now. Are we good?" "No," Jason replied. He turned his attention back to stuffing every empty space in his pack full of anything he thought would be useful. "But we'll get there." "Jesus," Murphy exhaled, rolling his eyes dramatically. "You sound like my wife. Now I'm going to go start the truck while you finish putting on your makeup. Why don't you find out from your brother where we're going exactly?" "You had the keys?" Jason asked, ignoring the slight and stuffing an extra phone charger into his bag. "Couldn't find 'em," he replied. "Titan, come," he added as he started out the door. "How are you going to get it started?" "Really?" Murphy looked back at him, his eyebrows raised. He rolled his eyes and shook his head before walking outside with Titan close at his heels. "You can hotwire a semi?" Jason called after him. "Of course you can hotwire a semi. Silly me," he said sarcastically. He slipped the phone from his pocket and readied himself for a marathon texting session. He wanted to know where his family was and how they were doing. He wanted to ask about Anna and the kids. He wanted to be sure that Dan and Abby had made it to the farm with Katie. Questions about his mother and grandmother burned in his mind. His excitement was all-consuming, filling him with a joy he could never remember feeling in his adult life. He could not contain the smile plastered on his face. He wanted to laugh out loud no matter how much noise he made. In the desolate remains of a dying planet, he had managed to make contact with his family miles away. He would find them no matter what it took. He looked at the screen, found the green message light flashing furiously at him. He smiled, knowing that Chris would have a mountain of questions for him. He tapped in his password and noticed 13 long messages waiting for him. He scrolled to the first entry and started to read. His smile faded and his excitement melted away. He dropped his pack to the floor and fell into the chair he'd sat in the night before, kicking empty beer bottles away from him. He was awash in sorrow as tears flowed down his cheeks. His hands fell to his sides, unable to read any more. I should have been there, he thought as he sobbed. Damn it, Dan, I'm so sorry. Jason? Murphy suddenly appeared in front of him. What's up, man? He was so immersed in his grief that he didn't hear the massive Kenworth roll up in front of the store. The giant red truck sat idling only steps from the front door, its red paint reflecting the sun's rays back into the station. Titan came to him, nuzzling and licking his hand until Jason stroked his short golden fur. The dog lay his head on Jason's lap, turned his dark eyes up toward him. He inhaled deeply, letting out a slow, sorrowful whine. My sister-in-law. She was bitten. Well, it wasn't too bad either, Matt joined in. Nice place, after we took care of the 3 zombies. Zeds, Chris sighed, shooting a quick glance over the top of his phone. Whatever, Matt replied. Not much in the way of food, but plenty of water. Some first aid supplies, too. No guns, though. From the decorations in the house, I'd guess they were anti-gun. Figures, Chris said. I bet if they lived, they wouldn't be so anti-gun now. Hey, man, Matt said. To each their own. I don't judge. If you say so, Chris sighed as he set his phone down. But how does any of this answer my question? We tried to wait out the storm, but it got dark and we decided to stay the night and really scavenge the house, Joe said. You're lucky we agreed on 2 days for your trip, Chris interrupted. Otherwise, I'd never been able to keep Rosa here. She was ready to run out the door after you as soon as the sun went down. It was all I could do to keep her from going after you. Where is she anyway? Joe asked. I was looking forward to my welcome home hug. She's in the other apartment with the kids and Anna, Chris replied. Where are Eric and Linda? Right here, Eric boomed from the stairwell as he knocked the snow from his boots. She's still purring like a kitten. Who is? Chris asked. It's a good one, Joe said. What is? Chris demanded. Linda loves it, Eric said. Loves what? Chris demanded again. But the color, Matt said, shaking his head. I can't believe she talked you into it. Hey, is that coffee I smell? Eric called out. Hey, Linda, coffee's on. Okay, that's it, Chris said, slapping his hands on the table. I swear to whatever God is listening that I will shoot the next person who says anything else without explaining what you're talking about. That farm we stayed at had a big garage, Joe laughed. Eric found a nice F-250 out there, though I wouldn't normally say the words nice and anything related to Ford in the same sentence. We thought since they were helping us so much we'd pack them up with supplies from the house for when they leave, Matt said, standing to head back to the stove for another mug of coffee. Thank you, Chris exhaled, falling back into the chair. He picked up his phone and started tapping out a message. It's hot pink, Matt said, stifling a laugh before diving into his coffee. You leave my hot pink truck alone, Linda called in from the stairwell. I like it. Eric strolled into the room, peeling his coat off and hanging it from the back of a kitchen chair. He set his Daewoo K7 on the countertop before grabbing a pair of world's greatest grandma coffee mugs from the sink. Who is she to Dan? Linda asked. He saved her life, Chris replied, and her sister's. Then she saved his, Joe added. Twice, from what I hear. I thought she was his daughter, the way you guys talk about her, Eric said. Katie is Dan's biological daughter, Chris said, but Lexi and Jane might as well be his. He's taken them in and cared for them like his own. Hasn't been that long since those two met, but Lexi's really close to him. How close? Linda asked with a hint of suspicion. Nothing like that, Matt said. More like kindred spirits, like she's his daughter and his friend. They have a mutual respect for each other. The sudden sound of a door opening and closing in the stairwell drew everyone's attention. Moments later, Rosa walked into the apartment, Anna following closely behind. There she is. Joe smiled as he stood, taking Rosa in his arms and kissing her. I missed you.
I was so worried when you didn't come back last night, she said, burying her head into his chest. I know he said 2 days, but I was afraid something might have happened.
I'm sorry I didn't come in to see you when I got back, he said, stroking her long black hair. I needed some of Chris's death juice that he calls coffee. I like it strong, Chris shrugged. Well, there's strong, then there's strip paint from a car strong. Yours is a bit stronger than that, Joe said.
It's better that you didn't come and find me, Rosa continued. Katie isn't sleeping well. She just started to fade when you guys got back. She thought...
I know there's no way you guys are leaving without finding this Dan fellow. Linda and I would love to help you guys. There's a butt in there somewhere, Matt interrupted. Yes, there is, Eric said. We agreed to tell you everything we knew, which I know wasn't much. We even stuck around to show you where everything happened. You want to find your family, and we want to find ours too. We were on our way north to hopefully find Linda's family up in Canada. You said we could take one of the cars across the way, but I was thinking... The truck's yours, Chris interrupted, extending his hand. You have read Divina Commedia. Nope, I grinned. History Channel did a special on it. Call it the Cliff's Notes version. I see. He deflated, his smile fading away with a scowl taking its place. The man did not like to be fooled. What is the purpose of the message? I was bored, I said. Oh, Daniel, can we please dispense with the lies? He asked, the corners of his lips curling up slightly. The letters inscribed were not done out of sheer boredom. They are too perfectly formed, too well defined. This was not done for a momentary break from monotony. You wanted people to see it. Why? It's a warning, I said coldly. A warning for anyone who crosses me or someone I care about. And who is that you care for? He asked, his glistening teeth exposed as his smile crept back to his face. Kinda miss the ice cream man, I said, turning away from him. I do love me some orange dreamsicles. Now, Mr. Foster, he began as if readying to chastise me. You know what? I interrupted him. I have some questions for you. I'm getting a little tired of these one-sided conversations, Jakey. Like, what the hell gives you the right to lock people up like this and torture them for your own amusement? Simple, he answered without any sign of change in his demeanor. Really, Daniel, the world as it is now has opened up unique opportunities for one such as myself and people such as yourself. For example, you see a car on the side of the road that piques your interest. In the old world, you would leave it where it was without any nefarious thoughts running through your mind. Now you think nothing of just taking it. People are taking what they want, whether they need it or not. Call it survival, call it living, or call it greed. The simple fact is that I am as human as anyone else when presented with this new world. I do what I do because I can. That's not entirely true, I replied. Most people still have morals to keep them from... Morals! He roared, laughing until his face reddened behind his graying beard. Whose morals are these? Yours? Abby's? Some clergyman out there who has spent his life fleecing the very flock he proposes to serve? What's to say that your morals should override mine? Who are you to question the morality of my search to understand the darkest part of the human mind? Morals are very subjective, Mr. Foster. Understand the human mind? It was my turn to roar. You don't try to understand anything. You play Mother Superior, looking down on us like we're lower than dirt. Yet instead of trying to learn something about us, you sit back in your chair smiling like a schoolboy getting his first Hummer while the people you kidnap suffer and die. You're like a kid with a new toy. You play with it until you get bored and then you break it. Professor, I snapped, mocking his chosen name. The room grew silent as I waited for the man to call his goon patrol to come in and start cutting off things I wanted to keep where God had placed them. I glanced behind the man to see Jeff sitting straight up in his cot, staring at me with wide eyes, his jaw nearly in his lap. Instead, old Jakey leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs and clasping his hands in front of his face, his eyes poking out over his knuckles. His laugh started low, rumbling from deep within his stomach, building until the prison chamber resonated with his maniacal merriment. Excellent, Mr. Foster, he all but shouted, launching himself forward and clapping his hands. You do not fear me. You speak out against me despite the knowledge that I could have your life snuffed out with a wave of my hand. You will not be broken easily. You are going to be so much fun. I can't wait, I said sarcastically. I'm sure, he said, settling back into his chair. Now, I know you speak your mind, so I will make this offer to you. You say you are unhappy with our one-sided chats. I must admit it does get tiresome. I believe that a bit of quid pro quo is in order. For every answer you give me, I will allow you one of your own. How very generous, I mocked. Are we going to prattle on over a Merlot and moldy cheese? I am making a very generous offer, Mr. Foster, he said, somewhat taken aback. It's not one I have ever made before, nor is it one I shall make again. I'm sorry, I said, trying to make my false apology as convincing as possible. The truth was, if I ever wanted to get out of Dr. Lecter's funhouse, I needed as much information as I could get. I shouldn't have been so hasty. I happily accept your offer. Very good, he said. I will even allow you the first question. How do your worker bees handle the dead without getting bit themselves? Interesting choice, he said. I've been able to develop a treatment of sorts with the help of the mutations. Mutations, I asked. You mean the black-eyed screamers? Yes, I suppose that's as good a name as any. How does it work? I demanded. Now, he wagged his finger at me. You have already asked 3 questions. You do not get a 4th. Let's not be greedy. I will say you will see how it's done soon enough. It was a follow-up to my actual question. A follow-up question is still a question, Mr. Foster. Fine, I said. Don't pout, he scolded. It's unbecoming. Now, what was it that caused you so much anguish that you spent the night sobbing into your pillow? The look on my face must have telegraphed my surprise to the man. Despite the fact that I had some idea that he had been watching us, getting slapped in the face with the reality of it still caught me off guard. I was thinking about Abby, I answered, which was not a full lie. It was partial truth, which was better than no truth at all, right? Oh, he responded, lifting an eyebrow questioningly. I thought you would be thinking about your dear daughter, Katie. She's 7 now, according to your phone's calendar. She is a very lovely child. I would love to meet her one day. She's dead, I blurted without thinking. The fact that he knew so much about my family terrified and sickened me. I'd forgotten he had my phone, and with it came intimate knowledge of my life and family. She was trapped in the house when we left. Almost everyone died trying to save her. When we got away, I split from the rest of my group. That's why I was out there alone, I replied, trying to convince myself of the lie. The man was no moron, and I would not get away with deception if I didn't fully commit to it. I'm sorry to hear that, he said smugly. I am curious, though. Why so much sadness for your spouse, who I fully believe has passed, but none for such an adorable little child? Because I didn't want to hear her name come from you or anyone else here, I said through clenched teeth. Fair enough, he said, leaning back in his chair again, the material crunching underneath him. You are, or were, her father. It's your duty to protect her from people like me. I narrowed my eyes and stared at him, feigning anger when all I felt was unbridled fear. I couldn't allow him to see through my lies. I had to protect my daughter in any way I could. Though I do have a question, he said after letting me stew for a few moments. All this time you have not spoken of your brother and his death. I can see from your photo album that your brother had a family too. His wife, huh? I don't understand this. You mentally torture me, and now you're acting like you want to be my nursemaid. Maybe it's the years of bad beer that's killed my brain cells, but I'm a little confused. It's a quirk of mine, really, he replied. I have plans to expand our little game, but for that to occur, you must be healthy. I had no intention of physically harming you so soon, and I am a man of my word, even when that promise is made to myself. I feel like amends are in order. Now, Name your meal." "Fried chicken," I said, after thinking for a few moments. He pondered. "Chicken is difficult to procure these days. The creatures have done quite a bit of damage to the local livestock. Are you sure there isn't anything else?" "Nope," I said. "Bone-in fried chicken. Drumsticks, breasts, thighs, the works. But it has to be bone-in. None of that boneless breaded crap. Honest fried chicken. You said anything I like. This isn't too hard for you, is it, Professor?" "Mr. Foster, please don't attempt to use third-rate dime store psychology on me. I promise you it will not work," he said. "I will see to it you get your fried chicken, though it will take a few days." "I look forward to it," I said, smiling. "Thank you, Professor." "Ah," he grinned while giving a small flourish. "A little courtesy does wonders for my demeanor, especially on such a beautiful spring day." Chapter 38. I spent the remainder of the day silent after the king of our little domain left us. Jeff and Tanya kept to themselves as well, which I was perfectly okay with. The intense emotional roller coaster that morning had completely drained me. The second I'd emerged from my mental vacation, the man virtually pounced on me to start his game all over again. I sat back in my cot and let my head fall back against the block wall. I closed my eyes and took in the sounds of new life flittering around outside. My mind drifted as the various birds sang the day away, thinking back to the spring days when Katie would sit by the window, watching the birds hop around on our front lawn. She would point and laugh, clapping her tiny hands whenever one of the many bright red cardinals landed on our bird feeder. Wherever she was, I hoped there were birds for her to watch. After many weeks of neglect, I finally slipped the black steel-toed boots onto my feet. Though a little loose, they fit well enough to get around in. It was nice to finally slip on footwear that was not marred with blood and dissolved brains. In the time I had been a guest of the professor's personal sanitarium, I had not been allowed a shower. The only respite from my own ripe stink was the small amount of cleanup I was able to do in the stainless steel sink bolted to the wall. To put it bluntly, I could knock a buzzard off a shit wagon with my funky ass. The light outside began to fade. The little sky I could see through our tiny portals to the world had turned a fiery orange as hints of pinks and purples danced across the wisps of clouds floating in an otherwise deep blue sky. One by one, the birds quieted down as the chirp of crickets slowly increased to a loud crescendo. A growl in my stomach made me realize that lunch had been skipped for the day. The professor enforced a strict schedule for feeding his pets, so it was a bit odd that he allowed lunch to pass us by. Perhaps I got under his skin a bit more than I thought I had. Shortly after the sun faded, the young Irish teen appeared, pushing the food cart down the hall. With a disinterested look plastered across her face, she unlocked my cage and stared me down as if daring me to move at her. "I want to lodge a complaint with the concierge," I quipped. "Lunch is unacceptably late, and my server appears to have an unsatisfactory attitude." "If it were up to me, I'd let the whole lot of you starve," she said. "Now, sit still, or I'll have to give you another good crack across your face." "You can try," I warned. She stopped mid-stride, eyeing me down as her fingers traced the .38 pistol stuffed in the tan leather holster on her side. "I can always shoot you." "You do, and you might end up in here instead of me," I said with a grin. She huffed, putting the small table down and setting a covered bowl on it. She watched me intently as if she expected me to leap from my cot and beat her brains in. The thought had crossed my mind, in case you were wondering. She went back to the cart, grabbing a glass of warm water and the plastic cup full of pills. Setting them on the table, she spun on her heels and all but fled out the door. She delivered my neighbor's food in record time and was off before I could come up with another smart-ass comment. I peeled off the lid and sat back, shaking my head in disbelief. Filled to the brim of a plain white bowl was a heaping helping of steaming hot pork and beans. With as often as I'd had them since the end of the world, I was starting to believe that it was very likely that no other food was left on this rotting planet but rows and rows of pork and beans.
I mean, come on. No canned ravioli or dried packs of ramen could be found? No. Everywhere I went, someone seemed to be able to find that nasty red and white can of pork and goddamn beans. Oh, Lexi would be having a field day with this one. Hey, Dan, you got kidnapped and mentally tortured for months. What would you like for your last meal? I know. Pork and beans. Anyway, I downed my pills first, figuring I better have the best tasting part of the meal before diving into the filler slop. I washed the bitter taste down with a big gulp of water, yet a lingering nastiness continued to tickle my tongue for a few minutes afterward. I never really thought about it, but I started to wonder how long it would take before various medicines started to reach their shelf life. Any medication that needed refrigeration was probably already gone, but even dry pills had an expiration date. I held my nose and downed the beans as fast as I could, pushing past the burning in my mouth as each little lava ball did its very best to burn the roof of my mouth. You like beans that much? Jeff asked, sitting on his cot with Tanya at his side. I used to like them, I said. But I think I've eaten a truckload of these things since the world shit the bed. Can't stand the taste of them anymore. You scarf them down like you can't get enough, Tanya said. I eat them fast so I don't have to taste them, I answered. Are you okay? I'm fine, she answered coolly. Thank you for what you did. But from now on, please, think before you speak. Every time you shoot your mouth off, you're playing with our lives, not yours. You're right, I admitted, swirling the syrupy remains around in the bowl with my spoon. Damn right she is, Jeff snapped. You almost got her killed this morning. I know, I answered, without lifting my eyes from the bowl. For some reason, the soupy mix captivated me as I watched the shiny metal spoon cut trails through the thick brown liquid. That's all you can say? He roared. You know? No, I said, a sudden feeling of anxiety gripping my chest. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say, but I'm sorry. You... Jeff, Tanya interrupted. Just let it go. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I set my bowl on the table and leaned back in my cot, trying to let my pounding heart calm. I felt warm despite the cold fear creeping up my legs and settling in my chest. The lights appeared to brighten as the most minute imperfections of the ceiling paint suddenly came into full detail. The shadows cast on the ceiling started to move, ebbing and flowing until the ceiling appeared as if it was breathing. Veins of color appeared on the paint, circulating around the ceiling's imperfections like blood through a vascular system. I sat up, the sudden movement setting the world spinning. Tanya and Jeff stared at me, their cell suddenly appearing impossibly far away. Their eyes on me filled me with intense paranoia and set my skin crawling water before setting the slice of deliciousness aside. I sifted through the pile of hot breaded goodness until I found what I was looking for. 3 drumsticks lay on the table in front of me, the bulging mass of meat begging to be devoured. Now, why there were 3 drumsticks I couldn't tell you. I looked over the pieces and found every piece of a full-sized bird. Last time I checked, a single chicken only had 2 legs, so unless this was the fastest chicken on record, someone in the kitchen had enjoyed a fried lunch of their own. Anyway, I tore into the drumstick, ripping the flesh away in mere seconds, leaving mostly bone exposed. I proceeded to do the same to let herself down until she was on her knees in front of him. I looked over at Jeff with a raised eyebrow. He returned the glance, shrugging his shoulders, his face registering the same look of confusion I knew I wore. I stammered. The keys aren't down there. Something else is, though, she said, her tone as seductive as the eyes she was now casting upwards toward Larry. With a quick zip, his fly opened. She looked up at me and winked as her hand slipped into his pants. Larry groaned, his body suddenly relaxing in my grasp. I stood in shock, trying to rationalize what I was witnessing when his body tensed again. A scream emanated from behind his gag as Tanya's eyes narrowed, her smile growing dark and sinister. Jeff looked on in horror, and I could only imagine what he bore witness to. Larry's screams grew in pitch, every muscle tensing as he struggled to back away from whatever she was doing to him. I pinned him harder against the bars. Whatever it was she was doing, he deserved it, and probably much more. With a sudden jerk, his head flew backward, nearly cracking me in the forehead in the process. He went limp, his eyes rolling up behind his lids. Unable to hold his full body weight, I let his unmoving form fall to the ground. Tanya sat where she was, her right hand soaked in bright red blood. Her grin never waned, a look of deep satisfaction on her face. "I've heard people joke about it, but I didn't really know if it was true or not," she said, making her way to her feet. She turned away and walked to the sink, turning on the water and allowing the blood to flow from her hands. "If what was true or not?" I asked, dumbfounded and slightly terrified of the woman. "They actually do pop," she said over her shoulder. "That is fucking horrifying," I said, looking over to Jeff. "Good luck, man." Surprisingly, Larry was not dead. In his position, I would probably beg for death. I almost felt bad for the guy. I mean, yeah, he was a psycho prick and deserved to die and all, but god damn! That is definitely not the way I want to check out of this world. Fairly certain the man would not be going anywhere in the near future, I left him where he lay and snatched the keys from his belt before unlocking Jeff and Tanya's cell. The two bolted out the door as soon as the barred cage entrance slid open. As soon as we were in arm's reach, we embraced each other in a group hug that was very long overdue. We had survived hell together, and I knew deep within that I would never have lived as long as I had without the support of my new friends. "Drag him inside," I said, once we stepped away from our therapeutic hugging session. "Leave him there," Jeff snapped. "I want to be sure if he wakes up before someone finds him, he won't be going far," I said. Not that I expect him to anymore, but better to be sure. Nodding in agreement, they each took a limb, and with me, pulling his legs, we dragged him inside my old cell. No sooner had we let him fall to the floor, we heard the door unlock. "Larry!" Bobby shouted. "Where are you, damn it?" I put my finger to my lips, waving the two behind me. The footsteps grew louder as the man approached, sighing in frustration as he neared. "Come on, Larry," he continued his ranting. "You taking a shit back here or what? We got work to do." "Hello, Bobby," I said, interrupting his rant with a .40 caliber Glock leveled at his head from inside my former cell. He spun on his heels, his hand darting to the pistol he kept tucked behind his back. "You want to die, Bobby?" I snapped, narrowing my eyes and slipping my finger into the trigger guard. "I don't need much of a reason to kill you, do I?" "Larry's gonna kill your ass when he gets back," he snarled. "You mean the nutless wonder here?" I asked, waving my hand across his prone body. "Call it a hunch, but I don't think he's going to care." Jeff moved with purpose from the cell, ripping the pistol from Bobby's waist and tucking it into his pocket. He patted the man down, removing a hunting knife and a set of keys similar to Larry's. "You guys are fucked," Bobby raged. "He's going to come back here and fuck." The punch came from nowhere. Jeff's fist landed across the man's cheekbone with lightning speed. His head snapped to the side, body following as the force of the blow sent him pirouetting to the floor. His face bounced off. I had seen that graying hair and balding head far too many times to not know the man who was responsible for so much pain. "Fuck you, Jake," I seethed. The Glock kicked, windows shattering in front of me. In a halo of red mist, the top of Professor's head vanished into a pulpy mess of gore and bone. The monitor in front of his dying body exploded as the .40 caliber slug slammed into the screen. I turned and walked away as his body slumped in his chair. A feeling of deep satisfaction settled in me as I made my way to the front of the building, where the others were waiting. Though I had been responsible for a couple deaths, I had not directly pulled the trigger on a living being until that day. I had committed murder, and I was okay with it. Tanya and Jeff stood at the open front door, both faces a portrait of concern. I stopped and looked out the door into the heavy rain shower that had brought visibility to mere feet. I took a deep breath, savoring the smell of the spring storm. "Let's go," I said, and stepped out into the soaking rain. Chapter 40. The threshold passed beneath my feet, and as if a blanket of filth had been pulled away, the darkness of the building disappeared and opened into the light of a midday thunderstorm. I walked down the few concrete steps, leaving the dry patch under the building's awning and into the cool spring rainfall. I turned my head to the sky, heavy droplets pelting my face and soaking every bit of clothing I wore. I inhaled the fresh air, closing my eyes and allowing myself to feel the clean water flowing over me. I imagined the hell I had endured washing away into a pool of thick black evil, slipping away in one of the many small rivers streaming across the asphalt parking lot I stood in. I opened my eyes as a streak of lightning tore across the sky, the brilliant hues of white and blue lighting up the dark clouds rolling overhead. The ground rumbled as a deep roll of thunder reverberated through the earth. There was the distinct possibility that I was in the crosshairs of a distant guard who had my head dead in the center of his scope. The gunshot that announced the professor's death had to have been heard by anyone nearby in spite of the storm. I didn't really care. I was enjoying the sweet taste of freedom for the first time since snow covered the ground. From Tanya's and Jeff's silence, I believed they felt the same elation. Stealing a glance over my shoulder, I found my new friends locked in an embrace, letting the knowledge that they were no longer trapped in that cage sink in. As I looked around the area, I was shocked to see the small municipal building sat completely unguarded and defenseless. I had expected to walk out and face a guard or something. Hell, a pissed-off Boy Scout with a slingshot would have sufficed. But there was nothing. No gates, no hastily thrown-together fencing. The building itself was very plain. The two-story, multi-tone red brick station butted against a river. It looked as if it was built intentionally to be very nondescript, with the only identifying markings I could see being a small overhang sign reading "Police" in bold white letters. Each spot in front of the station was filled. The black and white SUVs sat like silent sentries. Rain flowed like rivers over the glossy paint, washing away the layers of gore caked on almost every one of the squads. The only vehicle that stood out was the hot pink pickup truck parked closest to the doors we had exited. Why the hell anyone would paint a pickup hot pink like that, I will never know, but whoever did it left his cowboy hat on the dash in front of the steering wheel. "Where is everyone?" Jeff said, finally raising his voice to be heard over the sheets of rain. "No one else inside either," I said, wiping water from my face. "What did you shoot?" Tanya asked. "Jake was there," I replied coldly, glancing over my shoulder at her. "No, he's not." "There's no defenses," Jeff stated, swiveling his head around in all directions. "Nothing to keep the zombies out. This doesn't make any sense." "There's so many buildings, so many homes," Tanya added. "This place should be crawling with those things. A place this big should have zombies everywhere. Probably a good number of survivors, too." "In that case, all aboard. Your chariot awaits." "Just promise no more jokes like that," Tanya said, smiling as she shook her head. "Can't make that promise," I replied, climbing into the driver's seat. Though I had spent many hours as a medic inside various emergency vehicles, this one was one of the most advanced I had ever seen. Despite the fact that the dash-mounted computer had been completely ripped out, leaving only the mounted bracket in its place, the amount of buttons and controls made me wonder if this was a squad car or a space shuttle simulator. "Cross your fingers," I said as Jeff slid into the back seat, Tanya following close behind. "No one wants shotgun?" I asked the pair through the protective shield between the front and back seat. "No offense," Jeff started, "but it's been so long since we've been this happy together, we don't want to be separated by this thing," he finished, knocking on the thick plastic shield behind my head. I nodded, setting my Glock in the seat next to me, and turned my attention to the dashboard. soot reaching up like dark tendrils on the red brick. Twisted steel and blackened debris filled the depression of where the interior should have been. A sharp crack on the squad radio almost sent me flying through the roof. Slimy, cold terror embraced me as a voice that I could not possibly be hearing sang over the police radio.
"Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses falling. It's you who must go and I must bide. Hello, Mr. Foster. How wonderful it is that you are out in the world again. That was an incredible display of resourcefulness on your part, using William's bones like that. As soon as I saw you break it off, I knew that our game was about to begin. I must thank you for taking care of that little problem for me. Lawrence had become too unstable for my liking. His usefulness to me was at an end. I did hope that Robert could have been trained to behave, but Lawrence proved to be far too influential on the young man. It is a loss, but it was necessary. I know you must have a multitude of questions for me. How did I know your plans? That was simple. I had the generators shut off to see what you would do when you believed you were unsupervised. You don't think I wouldn't have had backup power for my cameras, did you, Mr. Foster? I was mere blocks away, watching everything unfold by remote. You see, I made you a promise when we first met. You would not leave that cell until I wanted you to, and that is exactly what has happened. I am no longer contained in the darkness to do my work in hiding. The world has opened up for me, and you have become my favorite new project. I suppose you are also wondering how I am speaking to you from the dead. Well, this is truly where our game will begin, Mr. Foster. As I said, I now know you fear that you will become a monster, like me. I wasn't sure if you would walk into that room or not, so it was a bit of a gamble on my part, and it was one that paid off. You didn't bother to check if the man was bound or gagged, nor did you see his hair had been dyed. Instead, you leveled off your pistol and pulled the trigger without a second of hesitation.
Its gnashing and clacking teeth echoing off the farmhouse. "This way, Professor," she said, stepping over one of the many rotting and decaying corpses that littered the grounds long before they arrived. "It seems our friend Daniel wasn't quite a scrap before leaving this place," Professor mused. "It appears that the story of the harrowing battle and death-defying escape was not all fairy tales." "I've seen worse," she said as she stepped over a badly rotting corpse. "I believe you have, young lady," he replied, strolling around another pile of corpses. "That is a lovely dress you are wearing today. The green hues bring a sparkle to your eyes." "Thank you, sir," she said coldly. They passed by the ambulance, the man taking a moment to stop and reflect on the story of Abby's death and how it had affected the mental state of his new project. His sly grin grew as his mind played back every moment of Dan's pain as he recounted a story he'd never wanted to revisit. They moved on beyond the carport and into the field. Silently, they made their way through the thick mud and unkempt weeds that had already begun to take over the untended farmland. They trudged up a hill, winding through a small copse of trees until coming to a stop in front of a weeping willow tree. "I see a grave," he said, after a few moments of contemplation. "I imagine you would not have brought me up here through all that mud and dirtied that pretty dress for a simple grave." "You're right, Professor," she said, crossing her arms. "Look at the inscription on the tree." He turned to read the notes dug deeply into the wood, the letters carved with painstaking precision, so the message would last until the tree itself was dead and gone. His smile grew impossibly wide as a small chuckle emerged from deep within him. "Raina," he said to the woman behind him, "be a dear and fetch a few of the workers." "Right away, Professor," she said. "And, Raina," he said, turning his head and locking a sinister gaze on her, "bring some shovel." Epilogue 2. "There's still something I don't understand," Jason said as he watched the Wisconsin border sign pass by.
"What's that?"
Murphy replied as he reached down to scratch behind Titan's ear. "Wait a minute," he said before Jason could say anything. He spun the wheel slightly right, lining the rig up with a lone zombie pulling itself along the middle of the road. Its lower half long since torn away, long ribbons of pulped entrails dragged on the ground behind it, leaving a trail of black viscous slime on the pavement. The truck barely registered the creature as its massive wheels crushed the monster's head, the pop of its skull overwhelmed by the loud whine of the diesel power plant pulling the multi-ton vehicle.
"Got him,"
Murphy smiled as he straightened the wheel.
"You were saying?"
"Yeah, nice one," Jason said. "About what kicked all this off?"
"I'd rather not talk about it anymore," Murphy said, his mood darkening. "I told you everything. Constantly questioning me isn't going to change the answers."
"Untie those panties, Marine. It's not about that," Jason said reassuringly. "It's about Washington. Why nuclear?"
"No idea," Murphy replied. "Like I said before, I don't have all the answers. I did my job. End of story."
"So the people who set off this plague had nothing to do with blowing up country capitals all over the planet?"
"I didn't say they did or didn't," Murphy replied. "But if I were to put money on it, not that money is worth anything anymore, I would say they didn't set off the nuke."
"Why not?" Jason asked, raising a confused eyebrow. "If they wanted to end the world, why not nuke it?"
"Why go through all the trouble building this biological time bomb just to go and set off a nuclear weapon?" Murphy answered. "It doesn't make any sense. For a group who went through all that just to set off a big explosion just seems too crude for them."
"So, who then?" Jason asked, watching a group of female walkers shambling along the side of the road. They cut onto the highway, making their way toward the rolling can of meat. The truck barreled along, removing the arm of a creature that ventured too close to the massive vehicle. "You really enjoy that, don't you?"
"Hell yeah, I do," Murphy beamed. "Think of everyone I take out as one more mark in my favor for what I helped do to this world. But to answer your question, there was a lot of chatter in the first few days. ISIS, Boko Haram, all the big players with plenty of nitwits